The water bottle gavel is in effect.
Want me to explain?
First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 173rd meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation, September 20th at Peoples Island. I'm saying this for the public record. Thank you for your attendance. The meeting is in order, and Kath would like to explain the presence of the microphones and the new setup for us today.
Just before we actually take the roll call and start, want to thank Greg Smith over there, who has, well, right after this, we're going to have a rock band in here, because look at the setup you've got over there. Everybody is now fully mic'd. Please speak. You're going to be able to pass the mics up and down, and we're going to be able to pass these over. We don't have quite enough for every single person, but please speak into the microphone when you make your remarks. And anybody over there, any of the staff, any visitors who speak, please go up to the podium and speak so that we get your recorded comments. So just don't forget that. Like when after I finish, if Wint wants to speak, I'm going to pass the mic down that way. So just want to note before we start the meeting that please speak into the microphone. Like that.
Well illustrated.
Well illustrated. We recorded a lot of, as we were practicing, we recorded a lot of things like, you better vote for this or else.
Wow.
So.
It's a tough room.
So,
all right,
now,
so we'll do the roll call now.
Okay, so
yeah.
Doug Pirelli.
Present.
Tom Maggs.
I just need to make one. This is a very important announcement. As many of you know, Wint Aldridge, who grew up along the beautiful Hudson River, and is known as the sage of Red Hook when it comes to historical items. Since the time he was a young lad, he has been an ever-ending quest to find the grave of General Van Ness of fashionable Red Hook in fashionable Dutchess County. These meetings are fantasy fulfillments for a lot of people. We spend hours reviewing these documents and place these things on. But one thing we could not do was find Van Ness's grave for Wint. Recently, however, we found the grave of General Van Ness, and he's located also along the beautiful Hudson River, buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Troy. After today's proceedings, the sage will make a visit to General Van Ness, reaching his lifelong ambition to find General Van Ness. So those of you who have any doubts about fulfillment of fantasies, exciting and conclusions, Wint is living history of this amazing house.
All right. To continue the roll call, Jennifer Lemack, Erica Krieger, Paul Stewart, Chuck Vandry, J.D. Lorenzo, Wint Aldridge, of course, is here.
Here, and I have to respond very quickly. The reason I care about this dead worthy is that he was the first supervisor of the town of Red Hook, otherwise of no consequence whatsoever. And I also should explain, so I won't have to do it to every one of you individually, why I have a black eye. Friday night at 9:30, there was a house invasion at our wonderful house on State Street here in Albany. And when I refused to give up any property to the individual, I received 3 right hooks, and we may see him in a police lineup someday. But I just want to say that even in historic districts, things like this can happen, and I'm none the worse for wear, if you'll overlook the black eye. Thanks.
Wow.
Wint, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's
okay.
awful.
Now you see why I did not put a mic over
Yeah.
by those two.
It's changing everything.
Wayne Goodman
Here.
and Kristen Herron.
Here.
Okay.
Moving on to the approval of the June minutes.
You need to
Motion.
say now who's making the motion.
Tom Maggs has moved to accept the June minutes as amended. Do we have a second?
Wint, seconds.
Wint
Okay.
Aldridge seconds that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes
Okay.
unanimously.
Okay. So do you want to talk about the next meeting?
Sure. I hope that you
Okay.
have something to
So,
offer, because I certainly
Are you
don't.
going to discuss that, Daniel?
next-
Our next meeting is December 6th, a Thursday, and since we postponed this one 2 weeks, that's coming up quickly. And it will be, well, Daniel will discuss that, I guess. But that meeting will also coincide with the Historic Preservation Awards. Do you want to talk about that?
So very briefly, the meeting will occur at the New York State Museum. The meeting itself will be held in the room we utilized last December, and then the state awards will follow later in the afternoon in the main theater at the State Museum, just off the suffragist exhibit. And we will be making arrangements for 1 or 2 different tours during that interim time, either with the collections at the State Museum or the new Erie Canal exhibit, which is opening next month. So we'll have entertainment and education for you in the interim between awards and the conclusion of our meeting.
Okay. And I just need to know again, as soon as possible, if anyone cannot make that meeting. Okay, because 7 is a quorum. I'm so grateful that all 10 of you were able to be here today. But again, we just need to know as soon as possible if anyone, please check your calendars if you cannot make that meeting.
Before we move on to reports, could I ask if there's been any movement on the acquisition of new board members? Am I stealing what you're going to say later?
No, we'll easily addressed.
Yeah, there has been no further movement, and that won't be taken up again until the new legislature convenes in January.
Okay, no news. The next up on the agenda is the Executive Deputy Commissioner Rob Hildebrand giving us the Commissioner's report.
Thanks, Doug. On behalf of Commissioner Harvey, I'd like to thank Doug Pirelli for taking on the role of chairman of the board and all of the responsibilities that go along with the position. And once again, we'd like to thank Bob McKay for his extensive service many years as chair of this board. Doug, the Commissioner, appreciates your willingness to follow in Bob's footsteps and your interest in examining the role of the body here. And thank you to all the board members and Division for Historic Preservation staff for accommodating the change in the scheduling here. I know a lot of people had to move things around to make this happen today, so we appreciate your commitment and your willingness to accommodate those changes. The New York's National Register program staff handle remarkably diverse and consistently challenging workload. National Register designation, we all know, is critical to all facets of the agency's programmatic work, from grant making to use of state and federal tax credits, and of course to compliance reviews. You know, the Commissioner and I thank you for your expertise and hard work throughout the year as highlighted at these quarterly state review board meetings. I'd like to share several agency initiatives with you today. First off, earlier this month, Governor Cuomo announced New York's newest state park. We have Shirley Chisholm State Park in Brooklyn. At 407 acres, it's the largest state park in New York City and will open in the summer of 2019. It's named in honor of Shirley Chisholm, a Brooklyn-born trailblazer who was the first African-American congresswoman, as well as the first woman and African-American to run for president. The park's a signature project under the governor's Vital Brooklyn initiative and complements the state's efforts to build 34 new or improved parks, community gardens, playgrounds, and recreation centers within a 10-minute walk for every central Brooklyn resident. If you haven't had a chance to see this property down there, it is absolutely fascinating. You're out in this these hills and grasslands, and you feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere, and then you look across the harbor, and then you turn around and you look at Brooklyn behind you and all the high-rises that are there. And it's really striking on what an impact this will have to the millions of people that live in the city. But there's hundreds of thousands of Brooklynites who will be able to walk to this park and experience the outdoors like they never have before. So I encourage you all to try to have a look at this property. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's fascinating. It sits at the end of Pennsylvania and Fountain Avenues. There's 2 properties. They were landfills. Some 30 years ago, they were capped by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, under guidance with New York State DEC. The properties are actually owned by the National Park Service and part of the larger Jamaica Bay area. And they did a fantastic job on capping this landfill. There was great forethought that went into this, and they did all the right things. The plantings are magnificent, and now it's been waiting these 30 plus years for all the testing to be completed and be able to get to a point where we'll be able to make some improvements and open this property to the residents of Brooklyn. Absolutely gorgeous piece of property. So we're very, very proud to be able to announce that earlier this month. Parks 2020 continues. We expect $90 million in capital investments to happen again in fiscal 1920. The agency's working on finalizing a list of projects that will be included in that. We're near complete with our draft list of projects. I'm not prepared to share a list of projects here with you today, but I'll say that it's a fantastic list. There's some really exciting things on the list, and there may even be a couple of long overdue projects right here at Peebles Island that we'll be looking to move forward on in 2019. Another subject that I just wanted to touch on briefly is the Division for Historic Preservation's care and management of approximately 1.5 million objects that are classified as museum collections. This is an often overlooked task that the division staff here are tasked with. It's a great responsibility. These museum collections are fascinating. Conservative estimates value them at over $100 million. These items are stored and displayed at more than 50 of our agency facilities, as well as being displayed internationally. They receive conservation treatment right here by staff at Peebles Island. And OPRHP has committed to developing a new, robust, and fully networked curatorial management system in the coming year. I see Michael smiling and nodding his head over there. Yes, Michael, you've been heard. We're working towards it, and we are going to make this happen. We expect the system to be functional in 2019. We're just getting things moving now, and Michael's commitment to this should be acknowledged. He's been pushing for it, and we're finally going to be able to make this a reality. And finally, I just want to recognize Daniel McKay, who's joined us a little more than a year ago now. And as you can all attest to, Daniel's been a pleasure to work with. We greatly appreciate his leadership in the division and also in the agency. He's been a great partner, and we're really glad that you came on board. Thank you.
Very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make a comment, I think this is
Microphone.
before this board. Should I have the phone?
Oh, the phone, yeah. Here's your phone, Wayne.
This is, I think, Rob's first appearance before this board, and some in the room may not be aware of his distinguished service for many years as the regional director of state parks in the central region, a region rich in historic sites, Lorenzo, Fort Ontario, Hyde Hall, and others. But as a regional director, he also managed important park facilities, and they contained historic resources. We never had a better friend, I think, among the regional directors in this state than Rob in terms of keeping an eye out for what was best for the historic resources that he managed, whether they were historic sites or whether they were historic structures and landscapes within the park system. And it's just terrific to see you where you are now, Rob. Thanks.
The next agenda item is the Deputy Commissioner's report. Daniel McKay.
So good morning, and thank you all for the effort to be here today, and sorry for the last 5 minutes of your journey was more complex than you typically anticipate with bridge closures and repaving projects, so thank you for your effort to be here, both the board members and members of the audience. It has been a very busy quarter here at Peoples Island at the Division for Historic Preservation, and I just want to call out Michael Lynch, our Division Director, our Directors Julian Adams, John Bonafide, and Chris Flagg, Bureau Coordinators Kathy Howe, Kath LaFranc, Nancy Herder, and as well as Dan McEnany, who handles our community outreach, for a very hard-driving summer. Things have been busy. Things have stayed on pace across a wide range of program areas. We've actually, John Bonafide shared that we've actually tightened up our compliance reviews. 99% of our projects are now being reviewed and approved within a 30-day window. We're really talking about incremental improvements to that at this point. It's remarkable what the staff has committed to, and to the extent to which the CRIS system allows us to deliver that record of timeliness in terms of reviews. And we are looking to further develop and expand the CRIS system. Mike Schifferly and the Information Resource Unit has some significant tasks ahead of them in the next 2 years. I think you'll see CRIS even a more robust and more efficient tool as a result. Tax credit activity, despite changes to federal tax law, has remained at a very robust pace. We have been ranked #1 in the nation for the past 3 years in terms of Part 3s and qualified rehab expenses, and I would expect at the close of the federal fiscal year in October, actually in September, that we will once again be ranked #1. We have not yet seen a diminishment of use of the federal or state credits as a result of federal credit changes. On the interpretive side, the Bureau of Historic Sites, which is based here, Chris Flagg's unit, we have, one of the things to note is that we have reinvigorated the interpretation of the Herkimer Mahone historic site, a revamped docent-led program, and changes to the furnished room settings at that site. We most notably have also completed restoration of the Tower of Victory at Washington's headquarters site in Newburgh. This is a commemorative structure at Washington's headquarters that was impacted by a hurricane in the 1950s and lost its roof in the 1950s, and now has been restored, fully restored, and we're looking forward to celebrating sort of new access and the restoration of that site over the coming year. That's a significant project at one of our state historic sites. I want to call out Kathy Howe, if I might. She has managed over the last several years development and implementation of our Trekker mobile field app. We're now taking that mobile app, which feeds survey and National Register related information directly into the CRIS system via an iPad or phone-based app, field-based app. Almost 20,000 submissions to our CRIS system from the first generation product. Kath is now leading a fairly complex team and is interfacing with other agencies in the state ITS workforce to develop sort of version 2.0. It's going to make the CRIS system even more efficient, and I've seen firsthand the complexity of that project, and Kathy, I appreciate you taking that on once again. It is a significant enhancement to our work. Yesterday, there was news that the Tribal Heritage Grant Program of the Historic Preservation Fund, as administered by the National Park Service, Department of Interior, awarded $39,000 to the Seneca Nation of Indians for restoration and improvements at the Seneca Nation Council House in Salamanca, New York. And Nancy Herder and Jen Wilkowski, who's in the room today, played a role in supporting that grant application, and it's very nice to see historic preservation funds being utilized by tribal preservation offices in this state. It's not something we typically see in the eastern part of the country, and very pleased to see the Seneca Nation taking advantage of that federal funding, and we'll keep you up to date on that project. We can welcome 2 new staff here to the Division for Historic Preservation. Mary Kins was the receptionist who welcomed you in the door. We now have an administrative support staff on this side of the property, on this side of the building, providing direct support to the Bureau for Historic Sites. And then Chelsea Towers is our new Superstorm Sandy coordinator. following in Paul Archambault's footsteps, and she has stepped in immediately and effectively to a complex project that is obviously well underway, and we appreciate her early demonstration of her capabilities in that project. I will let you know that as staff here well knows, civil service test results from several exams that affect our programmatic areas were released in September and will allow us to move both provisional appointments on staff and Natural Heritage Trust staff into permanent roles on our staff. So we're eager to make those changes happen. And these exams will also inform new hires once our critical fill request is approved by the Division of Budget. We've requested 15 critical fills from DOB, and 7 of those positions will represent new staff, new hires here at the division. And that's obviously a significant opportunity to restaff and move programs forward more effectively. Just yesterday, the New York City Landmarks Commission got good news. Mayor Bill de Blasio has nominated Sarah Carroll as chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. She is basically a lifer staffer at LPC, served a number of different roles there, and I think the initial staff reaction here is that that's a positive development for the Landmarks Preservation Commission in the city. Finally, I just want to acknowledge, and Jay, you may want to please add to these comments if you would. The division hosted a meeting Tuesday afternoon with New York Canal Corporation and New York Power Authority to discuss heritage fleet issues. This office is playing a compliance role in Canal Corporation's request to review the use of functionally obsolete canal vessels for a DEC reefing projects off both on Long Island Sound and the Atlantic coastline of Long Island. And that has attracted the interest and concern of the maritime heritage community in New York State. NYPA and Canal Corp did finally request a meeting with advocates such as the Preservation League and the Canal Society, other entities, Erie Canalway National Heritage National Heritage Corridor, and it was the start of a conversation. I think there is more to go, but I do think the Canal Corp and Power Authority have finally agreed that they have finally begun to hear that there's a need to be more transparent and that there's a strong statewide interest in identifying and understanding the decision-making around these historic maritime vessels, and that there will need to be an effective public-private partnership to propose other uses, other opportunities for these vessels, which Canal Corp is basically taking off the system because of safety and expense issues. Jay, you're welcome to add more to that either at this point or later in the discussion. But we did clear yesterday morning an additional 6 vessels for use on the reef augmentation project. All 6 vessels fall into the category of scows or barges. None were proposed as NR eligible by the Canal Corporation. None were seen by staff here as NR eligible. So that was a pretty easy clearance for us. And we do not expect any additional vessels of concern to the maritime heritage community to be proposed for reefing this year. So that concludes my report.
That's a great segue to the board business. We have our first item of old board business as the maritime sanctuaries and canal resources. I happened to be listening to NPR in my kitchen on August 21st, and I was listening to Capitol Press Room, and Susan Arbetter is interviewing Jay DiLorenzo, who gave a wonderful presentation about this topic and addressed it very, very cogently and clearly. And I wonder if you'd be willing to just sort of outline what's happening with this so everyone understands what we're talking about and what your views are.
Oh, sure.
And it's specifically in reference to the urger, I believe your presentation was.
Sure, thank you. and some of you, I think, have probably heard about this. It's an issue of concern to the league. It's been an issue of concern since April, when the governor announced the augmentation of reefs off the coast of Long Island using both materials from the demolition of the Tappan Zee Bridge and canal vessels that are owned by New York State. And so we were immediately concerned, in part because of the numbers. We were talking about anywhere at that point up to 30 vessels planned for reefing. We reached out to the State Historic Preservation Office, and we've had conversations with them just to get a better sense of the process, because at that time it was clear to us that we hadn't heard about this and that those in the maritime community had not heard a whole lot about it either. It really came as a shock to folks, and they felt a little flat-footed on it. The state has, I think, been very successful over the years in promoting the canal, promoting it for its commercial use, its recreational use, its tourism use as an attraction for visitors in the state and outside the state. And I think in so doing, they've created a really strong group of canal lovers and people who feel very strongly not just about the canal, but also about the vessels that ply the canal. And so it's not surprising to me that there's been a little bit of a backlash to the Canal Corporation and to the New York Power Authority on this. The New York Power Authority really took responsibility for the Canal Corporation, I think, in January of 2017. So they're relatively new to this. Prior to this, it was the Thruway Authority. And I think that as relative new stewards of the canal, I think they're doing their due diligence, and they're doing their assessments, and they're considering what's best for the canal, and looking at the costs of doing business, et cetera. Unfortunately, up until this meeting that we just had, it's been a very opaque process, and that was one of our biggest concerns. In fact, that reefing has already gone ahead. There's about 13 vessels that have now gone through the SHPO review. 7 of those have been reefed already, and 3 of those were National Register eligible vessels. So we are losing National Register eligible vessels as we speak. So we were trying to get a better sense from the Power Authority and from the Canal Corporation just what was going into their decision-making process. How were they determining which vessels should be lost? Were they looking for other alternatives? And are there ways that we can help them? Underlying all this is the issue with the tug Urger. And the tug Urger is a vessel that's not proposed for reefing. It's a vessel that probably many of you are aware of. It's a National Register listed tug in New York State. It was built in about 1901. It went into service for the state of New York in the 1920s, did that service up through the 80s, at which point it was retired and then saved by a group of interested people in New York State, not the least of which is Tom, and Tom can shed a little more light on that. This tug, this vessel, which is no longer doing canal duty, became the ambassador through the canal, became the teaching tug. Had over 100,000 fourth graders on it over 25 years. It was used to introduce students and the public to the canal. It was really the centerpiece of those canal community celebrations, traveled the length of the canal, and was the state's ambassador to these canal communities. And we've seen what's happened is these canal communities have really revitalized and reimagined and rediscovered their waterfronts, in part because of the actions of the Urger, and it's really had a wonderful impact. Unfortunately, the plan that we heard being proposed was to have the tug removed from the water, made so that it could no longer be on the water, and put at a thruway rest stop on the westbound side of the thruway between Fonda and Cangeri, where many, many fewer people could see that boat and really understand and really see firsthand what it is to live and work on the canal. So we have a real issue with that vessel as well, particularly knowing that it's National Register listed. So we were happy to be able to meet with the Power Authority and the Canal Corporation. I think we're going to, speaking as the president of the Preservation League, we want to keep the pressure on And we want to make sure that they hear from these interested canalers throughout New York State. We have a petition with well over 1,000 signatures on it saying that we want the urger to stay as the state's teaching tug. We think that's a reasonable investment and a reasonable responsibility for the state to live up to. We want transparency in the process for the decision-making that goes into the reefing of these vessels, and that we want to make sure that all of the vessels are going through proper review, which it does seem like they're doing. However, we do have a few National Register eligible vessels now on the bottom, and we're not sure what the next steps are and what the plans are moving forward.
Thank you, Jay. Please, Tom.
A number of years ago, a wonderful gentleman that he and I served on the Rensselaerville Institute board for a number of years, the Edwin Gould Foundation, New York, a man named Schuyler Meyer. Some of you may recall Schuyler, who loved the urger and took on that as a key responsibility, helped raise money through SCOW. A number of years ago, we literally got the canal to open up early. And a gentleman named William Least Heat Moon, a Native American who wrote Blue Highways, started at the Statue of Liberty with the urger. We came up the Hudson to Waterford and proceeded. At Schenectady, Rotterdam area, we brought on RPI and Union College students. And we traversed up to halfway to Utica or beyond. Those students, as you probably know, RPI and Union, were very instrumental in the development of the canal. I might also add that the Joseph Yates House, which we're going to look at today, he's a wonderful fella. He voted against the idea of so I just want to put things in perspective. But the urger is absolutely, it transformed so many of our RPI students and our union students into taking a very, very proactive work upon bringing communities along the canal into the whole idea of tourism, to reconstruction of some of these towns and bringing the waterfronts of those towns into the public side. The urger was the key to that, and I think Jay should be commended for outstanding work. He was a program on the other day about it. I heard him in the local news, and I've heard him in the local newspapers. He's doing a great job. That urger is a critical component, I think, to New York's history and what we're all about here. That's just my own personal opinion. Do you have anything to add?
I have one follow-up question, and that is there a process that's being followed for the National Register canal resources that are being scuttled in terms of a Habs Hair documentation or some kind of formal recording of those before they're put?
So as Jay acknowledged, the first review conducted by this office earlier this spring, which led to, in mitigation, in exchange for the use of the 3 NR-eligible vessels, John Bonafide was instrumental in crafting a pretty aggressive adverse impact and compliance letter. What has come out of that is that there is Habs Hair level 3 documentation of the vessels that were utilized in the reefing project. There was a commitment to do a fleet-wide inventory, basically a historic context inventory of motorized vessels in the Canal Corporation's fleet. And it was clear from the meeting on Tuesday that as that context statement and inventory begins to wrap up for Canal Corp, that a management plan will begin to be developed for the motorized fleet components, the motorized fleet at Canal Corp. John, am I missing anything from that agreement?
Not from the agreement. We also issued a letter on the urger as well.
Right. We made it extremely clear that it would not just be adverse impact to take urger out of the water and mount as a permanent display, but the word significant was underlined, a significantly adverse impact. We really have used strong language to suggest that Canal Corp needs to come up with an alternative plan. And, I think they can best do that with cooperating with the numerous public entities on the public side to inform and partner on that plan. So I do hope that Tuesday's meeting was the first step in that direction.
And as an item of board business, is there any kind of action item that we can propose or motion to do anything as a board? Or is this just a conversation we're going to keep on the front burner? Comments?
Well, that would be entirely up to the board. I mean, if the board wants to pass some kind of a resolution that called for protection of the urger, or at the very least, a real intense look at possible uses for the urger, I think that would be helpful, and also that spoke to the importance of the fleet and the history of the fleet.
Is that a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Tom seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Good.
Who's going to write that motion? Would that be you, Jay?
I can take a draft at it, sure.
I'll be happy to help you at it.
Sorry, Brett.
This board was very supportive, as were members of the division staff here for many years, in advancing the National Register nomination of the canal system and then its designation by the Secretary of the Interior as a National Historic Landmark. And these vessels are pieces of that heritage. They were not included in the National Landmark designation, but they are the visible pieces that the public will most easily respond to and comprehend why this system is of overriding national importance. And I think that we should do all we can to keep them, and certainly the urger, in business and afloat.
Thank you, Wynn. Next board business item is from the Archaeology Committee. Chuck Vandry and myself have been working with a situation in Buffalo regarding the Buffum Street site, and just a little bit of background. There's a charter school, the Maritime Charter School in the city of Buffalo, that has proposed to expand so that it can house K through 12 instead of just a middle school. That proposed expansion includes building additions in an archaeologically sensitive area. Buffum Street is located where there was a former neutral Iroquois village between 1450 and 1500 or thereabouts. There's also a Seneca mission school that is directly within and under the footprint of the current building, and a Seneca Indian church on Indian Church Road in the near vicinity. It's a very sensitive area, and there was a lot of concern about this project initially because the city of Buffalo in the seeker process had issued a negative declaration allowing the project to move forward without any archaeology occurring. I personally met with Christine Abrams of the Tonawanda Seneca, Tim Kennedy, the senator whose building is in his district, and a number of people have been alerted to our concerns about this. I think this is becoming less of an issue because I think there's enough pressure on the city that they may decide to do the right thing and reverse their negative declaration. Chuck, you can clarify whether that's even possible. But there's a lot of concern about this building addition in an archaeologically sensitive area, and there's a consortium of people that are involved in trying to keep that from happening.
Yeah, certainly the city could reduce the rescind the negative declaration, but that would probably put them in some legal jeopardy with the applicant. You kind of have to decide who's going to come after you. But it could be done. And there also, as I understand it, is litigation by some people in the neighborhood who have not only concerns about the archaeology, but concerns about the building and other impacts to the neighborhood from the expansion of the school. And I believe that's going forward.
That's right. There's a legal case that's going to be heard on the 26th. There are 3 camps involved in this project. People that want to build the school without doing anything. There's a local community group that does not want the additions made to the school because of the disruption it's going to cause in the neighborhood. And then there's the archaeology community that's in favor of the school additions, but so long as the process is followed to protect cultural resources. So I was initially really concerned about this and put it on the agenda. I think there's enough community awareness of this project that this whole issue is going to be reconsidered during this court case. The other point I want to bring up about this is it's kind of a unique situation. This is a privately owned building that is a charter school on city property, and there's no funding hook for Section 106 or Section 1409. And with the city of Buffalo being the certified local government and sort of the lead agency in the process, they can wave a magic wand and say you don't have to go through the process. So I think we need to be aware of situations like this and form committees to address that where we can.
I'd just like to add that we at DEC looked long and hard for some permit jurisdiction that we might have over the project, but we couldn't find any. And I think there is an effort, though, to find out whether or not there's somewhere in the mix state education department funding, but I don't think that's been settled yet.
When I had a meeting with a committee in City Hall, and they said that it was not that was not the case.
Okay, because any state involvement, whether it's permitting or funding, would trigger the need to comply with the State Historic Preservation Act, which
there's some involvement.
The city is not obligated to comply with as a
That's
municipality.
right. So I don't think there's an action item there. It's something I wanted the board to be aware of, and we've submitted our report. Thank you. Comments? Next item of new business. I just want to make reference to the email that I sent around to the board concerning Section 1409 and the kinds of things that the board could be doing in addition to its National Register reviews. I received a very warm and informative response from Wint that I really appreciate. This is probably something to discuss between meetings, and I don't want to bog this meeting down with a lot of discussion about it, but I think the board would do well to take a look at the statewide plan and have some input on the construction of that. We can certainly develop more committees based on new business items as they come up. In that email, I also proposed some possible future activities for the board, including board training events, maybe a board retreat. And as Chuck and I were talking about this, and he was reminiscing about past board meetings, you informed me that they used to be two-day meetings. And there was an opportunity, there used to be two-day meetings occasionally, and there was a process for kind of traveling around the state more and visiting more of the historic parks. I realize that's burdensome for the folks in this room that are doing the work that we're reviewing. I'm not trying to cause problems. I merely suggest that we consider that.
It's not necessarily burdensome for us. It's just with only 10 of you, it's difficult to get a quorum at best. So traveling around is one more thing. I need 7 of you for a quorum, and each time I barely make it. That's why I said I'm so happy to see all 10 of you here. So I think we need to keep that in mind. I can't imagine getting you to stay overnight right now. Everyone is so busy. I'm not going to go around the room, but I can tell from what you've told me individually, it is very difficult for some of you even to get a day away from your own offices. So I think you need to keep that in mind. We are more than willing to do training. I think we'd like to know what kind of training you feel the need for. We could certainly incorporate a training session on a particular subject into a meeting. We were down a staff this summer, and we were absolutely swamped. It was difficult for us to get even the projects that are on the agenda to you. I was actually going to save this for later, but maybe the time to do it is now. I want to personally commend and thank each of the 4 NR staff for doing really double duty this summer. Everyone took a project of Emily's, one that you might see them present, or one that they finished up that they may have been presented at a previous meeting. They took on extra tax credit projects. They behaved in such a collegial and commendable way that I am so grateful to each of them, and I want all of you to know that. However, the work far exceeded our ability to do it. So we're more than willing to do training. You need to tell us what particular topics you would like to be trained on, or you need more guidance on. We'll be happy to do that. 2-day meetings, you'll have to tell us. Can you spare 2 days away from your offices? That's a subject for just maybe we'd like to see some discussion on that right now. That's just a little perspective.
I think the training is a great idea, the people who most need training are members of the state legislature. And if you can get to at least the appropriate committee members there and their staff, because they need to know more about what we're doing. Daniel was just terrific when he was working for the Preservation League in informing them, but maybe in a more organized way, we could offer our services.
Well, I'm not complaining either about the lack of staff. I don't want to say that I am. I'm just saying that the work and the quality of the work, how much we have to do now for example, for an historic district, to get to the Park Service, the extra scrutiny that's being put on it, it's a lot of work. And so now, hopefully, with Daniel's announcement, we will be able to fill Emily's position and at least get back to bare minimum. But you tell us, maybe give us some idea of what kind of training you would like to see. And I would like to hear if people think they can get away for a 2-day meeting. How about you, Kristen?
Well,
Well, speaking individually, for me, a 2-day meeting would be more doable in March or December. But because next week I'm on their side of the table at a board meeting, September and June are my particularly busy times. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, that's good information. I
yeah.
think we should continue this conversation and maybe by email as a board and come up with a draft schedule that we might be able to.
You know, we'll be scheduling next year's meetings in December. And we're kind of also restricted by when the letters have to go out and, trying to space out the projects. We have a lot of districts in the background waiting to come forward, some that were in Emily's territory that we're still dividing up, trying to bring forward. I know Jennifer's very busy. Can you all get away for a 2-day meeting?
Don't answer that.
No, I do want to hear the answer. I do want to hear the answer.
Kath, I had a
tell me by email what kind of, I'd like to hear the discussion, really.
Kath, I had a question on the quorum piece of it. So I don't know what the kind of the guidance document is that says what your quorum is, but could your quorum be calculated on the number of board members that we actually have versus the number of board members we're supposed to have?
It is based on what we actually have, so it's 7 out of 10, I believe, right now. I think that's the way it goes. I'll have to check on that. It's 7.
Because quorum would not go up with the.
Oh, I see what you mean. Actually, I'm not sure of that, Jay.
I mean, it just doesn't seem fair to have the quorum be so close to the number of trustees that you actually have. It's usually calculated on the number of trustees that you have versus the number of trustees that you're supposed to have. Or could have.
Building code variance boards, it's based on the actual number of members on the board, not how many we have appointed.
I will check on that. I will ask Kathleen Martens. But still, I don't want to do business with, 4 or 5 people either.
No, but it might take a little bit of the kind of.
But it would give
gnashing
you
of
some
teeth out.
flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Final piece of board business. I just want to mention, this is more of an announcement, the guidelines for archaeology in New York City. I believe this is a final document. Dan, do you want to?
No, this is not final. It's
This
got
is
one
still
more
a
round of
draft.
review.
So this is being circulated for public comment,
Yes, they have one more public meeting.
and your office had a lot to do with the development of this or commenting
We
on it
did.
already?
This was funded under the CLG program, and this is about 2 decades since New York City has come in for that funding. So we're very excited to fund this, and we're funding them for revisions of their design guidelines. So this is
Great.
2 years in a row.
So I think we could make this document available to the board if people want to comment on that, and I will facilitate that after the meeting.
And then just 2 more things. Did you all get the LGBT context that I sent out by email?
Yes.
And then we are about to, we're working on the RFP for the civil rights, to hire someone to do the civil rights context, and I'll be circulating that to Jennifer and Cordell. And Jennifer, thank you. You're on our committee. We're going to be working on that one. Kathy drafted it, and we're going to be circulating that to you and Cordell and Gretchen, and then we'll be sending that out, looking for a consultant and hoping to start that project. When, Kathy, in January?
Yeah.
January.
Yes. Hopefully have a consultant on board in January.
So we're very excited about those projects as well.
Okay, I think we are prepared
Do
to
you wanna,
embark on the
introduce the board?
reviews.
Do you
Yes,
wanna-
yes. I'm going to ask the board members to introduce themselves. This is a procedure I want to go through at every meeting. Because we have guests, because we change our venue, I think it's important for us to be collegial and to introduce ourselves to the people we're serving. I sent some of that information along in my email. And to that end, I'm Douglas Pirelli from Buffalo, New York. I've been on the board since 2014, serving my second term. Mark Peckham is the person who asked me to consider joining the board through our interactions with projects. This is my second meeting as chair, and I appreciate being allowed to do that. I'm an archaeologist by training. I believe the board composition is supposed to consist of 2 archaeologists, and I fulfill one of those roles. I am the director of the UB Archaeological Survey at the University of Buffalo, a clinical assistant professor of anthropology, and the president of the New York Archaeological Council.
I'm Kath LaFranc. I'm the National Register Coordinator and your humble secretary.
Kath is the doyenne of this division. She's been with us, I think, for 74 years now, 75.
My greatest man.
I'm Winter Aldrich. I worked for many years for the Commissioner's Office at the Environmental Conservation Department, and in that capacity, I represented that agency, as Chuck does now, on what was then called the Committees and Registers. It was before the creation of this board. So that was probably 1976 or something like that. So I've been around for a while. And then for about 15 years, I was privileged to serve as Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation at State Parks. I've been retired since 1910, or is it 2010? And I'm involved in a number of nonprofit organizations that have a bearing on all of this.
I'm Tom Maggs, and I do what she tells me to do. No, I'm 105 years old. I serve on 14 different boards, and I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I go to bed at 11:30 at night. My wife says there's no off switch, and I go back to Parks when Orrin Lehman, I used to visit with him in his office, and I got involved with the Capital District originally, and then was asked to serve for my dear friend Lucy Rockefeller-Waletsky when she's not able to be here. And I went as my parole officer from 1910, and I do the best that I can to appear at these things. I love history. I have a doctorate in it, and I enjoy it. And I believe very strongly about giving back. I think those who work here, the employees, I've said this many, many times, I'm a private businessman. I've been very, very lucky in my life. I would hire any person that I've seen working in state parks and historic sites with my own money, not with someone else's money. They're top drawer. These are absolutely dedicated people. And those who are visiting here today, you are in the best of what New York State has to offer. These are dedicated servants who have no agenda but to serve the people of New York. And I'm proud to be here.
Gee.
Younger brother.
Paul Stewart. I've been on the board for a number of years, and I work for the Community Loan Fund, and I'm here in part because of my involvement with the Underground Railroad History Project in Albany.
National Register.
I got one.
A National Register site, yes.
National treasure.
Good morning. My name is Erica Krieger. I'm an architect by profession. I'm here representing the Secretary of State. I am Assistant Director for Variances for the Division of Building Standards and Codes.
Hi, J.D. Lorenzo, President of the Preservation League of New York State. I've been at the league since 2001, and I don't really remember how long I've been on the board, but it's been a while.
Wayne Goodman, Executive Director for the Landmark Society of Western New York, based out of Rochester, a post I've held since 2010, and I believe this is my second term on the board.
I'm Chuck Vandry. I am the Historic Preservation Officer for the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation's designee on the board. I think I've been on the board since Wint deserted us to go to work for Parks in 1994. I'm an archaeologist by training, and in my job at DEC, I basically do a little bit of what a lot of people at People's Island here do.
I'm Kristen Herron. I am the Program Director for Architecture and Design in Museums at the New York State Council on the Arts. I serve as the proxy representative for our chair, Catherine Nichols. I've been on the board in that role since 2014. I have a background in American material culture and fiction. And I came from, before I started the council, I was working in historic sites.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Commissioner of Education's designee. I work at the State Museum as Chief Curator of History, and I believe I've been on the board for 7 or 8 years, at least. I just remember when I first started at the museum 15 years ago, the gentleman who served on the board was John Shear, and I knew he was getting ready to retire, and I said, when you retire, I want that gig. So it took a couple years, but I'm here, so.
Thank you, thank you. I believe we are ready for the nominations now as our next item of business. And first up is the Columbus Monument, is that correct?
We're very excited about a couple of these nominations today.
We're excited about all of the nominations today.
Yes, we are excited about all the nominations.
We're excited about all of the nominations.
Jennifer Betzworth is going to present first on the Columbus Monument in New York.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Good morning. So starting off strong with the Columbus Monument, which is located at the heart of New York's Columbus Circle. I can figure out where to stand with this microphone. It's locally significant under criterion C in the area of art as an outstanding example of a late 19th century public monument in New York City, and under criterion A in the areas of ethnic history and social history for its strong association with the large Italian American community in New York City during the 19th century, and the complex cultural history of that group. The monument serves as a tangible manifestation of the presence of this community and represents the dynamics of citizenship, assimilation, and identity that characterize these immigrants' lives. After Italian immigration in the United States increased during the late 19th century, Italian-American community leaders used the image of Columbus to help unify the diverse regional groups of Italians and create a cohesive Italian-American identity. Columbus's ascribed identities as the first immigrant, a Catholic, an Italian, and a general national hero made him the ideal representative for Italian-American heritage and a symbol of its acceptance into the mainstream American culture. The quadricentennial of Columbus's 1492 voyage proved an ideal opportunity to publicly redefine the image of New York's Italian-American community. After Congress decided in 1890 that the World's Columbian Exposition would be in Chicago rather than New York City, a group of New York's Italian-American societies and Carlo Barsati, the editor of Il Progresso, the first Italian-language daily newspaper in America, worked together to create and organize a Columbian celebration and establish a grand monument to celebrate Columbus in 1892. Italian immigrants donated funds for the monument, participated in preparing the site, and in the 5-day celebration culminating in the erection of the Columbus Monument. These festivities reflected the power of the growing Italian-American community in New York, its priorities, and its success in casting itself as American and patriotic. The erection of the Columbus statue in the geographic center of New York City recognizes the power of these cultural leaders to mediate between immigrant groups and the larger society in their attempt to help Italian-American immigrants gain status. At the same time, the statue represents the loss associated with the merging of regional cultural identities. The monument was designed by Italian sculptor Gaetano Russo, who was born in Sicily and educated in Rome. Russo was well-known as a sculptor of allegorical figures and commemorative monuments in Italy, but this is his only work in the United States. The statue incorporates figurative and classical motifs, Beaux-Arts sculpture, and American iconography into a monumental neoclassical composition of high-quality materials and craftsmanship. The form and content of this work, which celebrates Italian nationalism and American patriotism, embody a number of ideas about civic pride, patriotism, nationalism, and ethnic identity that informed American culture in the early 20th century. Due to its prominence, New York's Columbus statue remains part of the ongoing political conversation at state, local, and national levels about Columbus, Columbus Day, and Columbus monuments, and these discussions highlight the monument's continuing importance in light of shifting understandings of its artistic and historical merit. The nomination draft, which you all had, was prepared by Glenn Umberger of the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and that is the Columbus Monument.
As an archaeologist, could I ask you to go back to the picture of the trowel?
Yeah. It's the commemorative trowel, which was used.
I mean, it's beautiful, but I still want to dig with it.
I know. You wouldn't be able to sharpen those edges. They're a little too nice.
That's awesome.
I
Questions?
have this awkward.
Please.
No, it's okay. I have this awkward. You can hear me through the mic. It's a little awkward that I can't look at you, Jen, when I'm speaking to you. So apologize for that. So I appreciated all the discussion of the complexities of the interpretation and the legacy of this monument. And I had one little question, which is the contemporary discussion ends in, looks like December 2017. And in early 2018, Mayor de Blasio's Monuments Commission came out with its report, which decided what they felt the fate of this would be, including some interpretive markers and commissioning a memorial to the indigenous population. I don't know if that's really going to happen, but is there a way to just add, to me, it could use that additional sentence or two of what happened in early 2018, and is that?
That is that is likely something that we can note as an addition, yes. I think that, it is notable that there is no intention to take down the statue. I personally feel that the addition of interpretive signage is not inappropriate. This nomination would not prevent that from happening.
Okay. Oh, good.
Good comment. Other questions or comments about this form or the presentation? Do I hear a motion for the Columbus Monument? So Wayne Goodman moved, and Wint Aldrich will second.
Okay, wait then. Good thing your name's both beginning with W, because I already, and Wint is second. Thank you.
All in favor of recommending this as National Register eligible to the Commissioner?
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. Next is the First African Methodist Episcopal Church in Bethel, New York.
The First African Methodist Episcopal Church Bethel, more popularly known as Bethel AME, is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good local example of an early 20th century neo-Gothic church. It is additionally locally significant under Criterion A in the areas of social and ethnic history for its association with one of Harlem's leading African American congregations during the 20th century. One of the first African American congregations in New York City, Bethel AME was initially established in Lower Manhattan in 1819. Just as the city's black population began to root itself in Harlem, the congregation purchased several row houses on 132nd Street, keeping one as a rectory, which you can see right there, and taking down the rest to create space for a new church, which they constructed in 1912-1913. The cast stone-faced building, designed in the neo-Gothic style by Wengenroth and Matson, is modest, but nonetheless expresses pride and the aspirations of a congregation establishing itself in a new neighborhood. Its design includes traditional Gothic elements, such as its large arched windows on its side elevations, buttress-like piers, and masonry facade, suggesting tradition and stability. The architects blended these recognizable features with a rectangular plan better suited to Manhattan's narrow lots and Protestant worship, and took advantage of cast stone technology to create detailing without the cost of stone carving. Over the 20th century, Bethel AME played an active role in the neighborhood, serving as an important gathering place and spiritual center for the neighborhood's African American population and as a champion for racial and social justice. The congregation's history of activism and tradition of strong leaders, like its socialist minister, Reverdy C. Ransom, has also made the church an important site for meetings, speeches, and demonstrations. Notably, Hubert Harrison, the founder of the New Negro movement, chose the church as the location for his first mass meeting in 1917. During the meeting, Marcus Garvey gave his first speech since returning to Harlem, captivating the crowd and speeding the growth of his Universal Negro Improvement Association. The church's ministers also played important local roles in the civil rights movement and led the way in developing community programs and initiatives that responded to local needs. We're also making an argument for exceptional significance at the local level to honor the congregation's leadership in constructing an early church-owned apartment building to provide affordable housing in the neighborhood. Conceived of during the mid-1960s in response to the local challenges presented by urban renewal, high rents, high poverty rates, and housing shortages, Bethel AME partnered with local banks to construct the Bethel Manor Apartments. While this was not the first church-led housing project in Harlem, it is an early one and predates the more numerous projects led by church community development corporations during the 1980s. This was a Columbia draft from one of our historic preservation students there, and we do have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Thank you, Jennifer. I thought this forum did a really nice job of making a good case for why a 1972 building would be included in this context, in this location. But that's something we could certainly discuss as a board. Questions or comments about the First African Methodist Church in Bethel? Do I hear a motion to accept this? Paul Stewart moves. Second by Tom Maggs. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you.
Thank you.
And next is the First Reformed Church of College Point, Queens.
The First Reformed Church of College Point is significant under Criterion C at the local level in the area of architecture for its representative, intact, and rare examples of 19th century frame religious architecture in Queens. The property is additionally locally significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its association with the development of College Point, a community initiated and supported by German industrialist Konrad Pappenhusen, and the growth of the predominantly German congregation. In the decades after opening the Enterprise Rubber Works in College Point in 1854, Pappenhusen became an important benefactor to the community, which effectively functioned as a company town. In addition to building housing and utilities and establishing an institute, he provided funding to build the First Reformed Church. Constructed by local builder Ernest W. Carker and completed in 1873, the church design blends a Wren Gibbs plan with vernacular details of the Gothic Revival and Italianate styles. Moving into the interior, features paneling, detailed scroll work. The windows are a little bit later, but it's lovely. The promise of good employment and benefits and a thriving community drew more German-speaking immigrant workers to College Point, and the congregation grew. In 1881, the campus was expanded with the construction of a Sunday school building. Funded by church deacon Charles de Neufville, who had recently married into one of College Point's leading families, the Sunday school building has more fanciful, picturesque ornamentation than the earlier church. And while its builder is unknown, the Sunday school's eclectic blend of Gothic, Italianate, and Eastlake styles reflects knowledge of popular trends. The exuberant use of scroll brackets, timber joinery, incised carved ornament, and fretwork resulted in a stylish building that helped establish de Neufville's reputation in the community. And we have a few interiors. It's pretty much just one large space, and then the painting is all from the original period and construction of the church. The congregation offered German language services into the early 20th century, all while continuing to grow and welcome in new community members. The 450-member congregation purchased this neighboring building as a new parsonage in 1928, so we've included it in the nomination as well. The congregation remains an important part of College Point's community and celebrated its 145th anniversary last year. The project to nominate these buildings was led by Sacred Sites out of New York Landmarks Conservancy, and we do have a letter of support from New York City LPC.
All right, thank you. Questions about the First Reformed Church of College Point? Comments? Do I hear a motion to accept this and recommend for National Register? Jay DiLorenzo moves. Can I have a second? Erica. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. And Christ Church, Oyster Bay, Nassau County is next.
Christ Church is locally significant under criterion A in the area of social history for its association with the history of one of Oyster Bay's oldest congregations, its missions and growth, and for its role in the history and development of the village of Oyster Bay. It is additionally locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture for its collection of diverse buildings reflecting the expansion of Christ Church over the past 2 centuries. Founded in 1705, the Anglican congregation originally met in a combination town hall and church building. 2 new churches were built on the same foundation over time in 1750 and 1844, and a churchyard was established next to it. A portion of that churchyard remains on the south side of the current church building. The 1750 building had become so decayed by the early 19th century that the congregation began using the nearby Oyster Bay Academy building as a worship space. The Academy, founded in 1802, was one of the community's earliest schools and is the oldest building on the church campus, and is a good example of Federal and Greek Revival architecture in Oyster Bay. The Academy lasted approximately 20 years when it was replaced by free state-sponsored schools in the community. After the congregation was able to build a new church in the mid-19th century, they adapted the building to serve as a rectory and gathering space. You can't see it well here, but there's examples of student graffiti all over the outside of the building, which is somewhat delightful. So during the late 19th century, the congregation really began to thrive again, and in 1878 erected this stylish Victorian stick-style building. And in response to the growing needs and size of the 200-member congregation, they constructed this Carpenter Gothic parish hall in 1894. After Oyster Bay resident and Christ Church member Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901, the church attained a greater level of local and national attention. Roosevelt and his family members were active in the life of the congregation, and Roosevelt's funeral was held at the church in 1919. And this picture is really perfect because we can see the church here, the parish hall, or not the parish hall, the rectory here and the parish hall here, so you get a sense of where they are all together on the site. In 1926, the frame church was expanded and received a stone neo-Gothic redesign by the architectural firm of Delano and Aldrich. Christ Church's embrace of a Gothic design reminiscent of an English country parish church is reflective of larger trends in the design of Episcopal and Anglican churches which had emerged during the mid-19th century. Delano and Aldrich enlarged the building and clad it in variegated sandstone and added neo-Gothic details while working within the constraints of the existing building. There is some remnant of that frame church in these hammer beams, but it is a very different church than the one that Teddy Roosevelt attended. The church is also significant under criterion C in the area of art for its intact collection of stained glass windows designed by Oliver Smith. Smith, a watercolorist and stained glass designer and manufacturer, is known for his medieval-inspired arts and crafts style windows. Dr. George Talmadge, rector of Christ Church during the building's expansion, approached Smith, still a young artist at the time, with a proposal to create the windows. Christ Church was Smith's earliest large commission, and working on site, he completed the 3 large chancel windows for the 1926 renovation. Over the next 12 years, he completed the remaining windows at his studio in Pennsylvania. The 18 windows Smith designed and fabricated for Christ Church reflect his preference for medieval forms and colors inspired by Chartres Cathedral, as well as his interest in using period techniques to fabricate the glass. They feature small panes of glass in jewel tones, narrow borders with geometric or woven details, lead soldering of irregular width, and hand-painted Old and New Testament imagery. By the time he completed Christ Church windows in 1938, Smith had established himself as a regionally prominent stained glass artisan, and that's Christ Church.
Thank you. Questions or comments about Christ Church? Please.
So,
yeah.
Kath and Jennifer know I have to speak on this one.
Yes, yes.
I don't want to say who might have a pew from this church.
Oh, that's a good part of my... So I was incredibly excited, of course, to see this nomination for all the reasons Jennifer has explained, from the architecture, the stained glass windows, the TR connection, and the ongoing significance of this church in the Oyster Bay community where I reside. But it also has a very deep personal connection for me through my husband's family. He was sharing stories last night of his Sunday school lessons from P.J. Roosevelt, the cousin of the president, and John Gable, who is cited in this nomination as one of the resources. My in-laws reside in the Memorial Garden, and I was reminded that in the early 80s, when funds were raised to care for these stained glass windows, one of them behind the organ, so you don't see it, is dedicated in the memory of my father-in-law. And yes, when the church pews were removed in 1996, my husband was there at his mother's request. So one of the church pews is what I sat on this morning when I put my shoes on to come to this meeting. I'm no Tom Maggs in telling stories, but I was very.
Another good story.
But so I was very happy to read this nomination and to see it put forward. And whenever we're ready, I have to.
You got it.
I have to.
Other questions or comments?
Does anybody else want to comment on
I would like to
Moved
I would like
by
to make this
Kristen
motion.
Herron,
Yeah.
second by Tom Maggs. All in favor?
it? But she has to give the pew back, don't you think?
No, but they gave it to the parishioners.
Just pulling your leg.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Innisfree, Millbrook vicinity?
Okay,
You again? Wow.
me again. There was going to be more, so 5 is great. So Innisfree, a public garden and landscape blending Japanese, Chinese, modern, and ecological design principles, is nationally significant under criterion C in the areas of landscape architecture and engineering as the masterwork of landscape architect Lester Collins. Innisfree's distinctive landscape, which forms the literal and visual foundation for the garden, is set in a natural bowl wrapping around the 40-acre Tyrrell Lake. During the early 1930s, Marion and Walter Beck established a country residence near the village of Millbrook. Walter, an artist, and Marion, the daughter of a lumber and iron magnate, shared an interest in art and design. After initially planning an English estate, the couple fell in love with Chinese art and landscape and began redefining Innisfree based on their knowledge of the techniques of Chinese gardening. The Beck's Gatehouse is the only clear remnant of their initial interest in traditional English picturesque landscape design associated with the property. Beck distilled the placemaking techniques he observed in Chinese art and landscape design into something he called cup gardens, or carefully designed, inwardly focused gardens or garden vignettes, effectively three-dimensional pictures, set within a larger naturalistic or even wild landscape. Using Marion Beck's horticultural advice, Walter Beck quickly began erecting his own cup gardens as individual compositions in the landscape. Relating these cup gardens to each other and to the landscape as a whole would be the genius of Lester Collins. The Becks met Lester Collins in 1938 at a lecture on Chinese gardens at Harvard, where Collins was in his senior year as an undergraduate English major. The interaction would result in a relationship that would span Collins' life and career, bringing Innisfree from a private garden into a public garden, representing the fullest expression of Collins' work. So the garden is a bit too big to all fit on one map. So here's the gatehouse and the entrance road. It connects here. And you see the names of the gardens sort of going around the lake. And as I go along, we're going to be generally following the path around the lake with these images. I wish we could all go there and walk through instead of sitting, but this will have to do for now. If you have not been, though, you must go, as you will soon see. Under Lester Collins' leadership, both as the designer who created the Innisfree landscape of today and the president of the Innisfree Foundation, Innisfree successfully transitioned from a private to a public garden. Organizationally, he helped the Becks craft the original mission for the foundation and then shape the nonprofit that exists today. Physically, after helping create a private retreat for his friends and clients, Collins orchestrated its material transition to a public space that would both sustain and survive public attention. During his long association with Innisfree, he lived and worked there directly for half of each year for more than 3 decades. Collins studied and worked abroad for years at a time, most notably in Asia and Africa. In addition to serving as faculty of Harvard's Graduate School of Design and dean of the Landscape Architecture Department, Collins deeply influenced the landscape of Washington, D.C. and its surroundings with his many public and private commissions. Through his work and the deep friendships he developed with colleagues, students, and clients, Lester Collins established a national reputation as an important designer and educator who united intellectualism, pragmatism, an intuitive sense of space, and a surprising flair for what would make a design memorable. At Innisfree, Lester Collins created a conscious work of art that operates on many levels at once. It possesses a universal, timeless quality and is yet a clear expression of what Collins saw as the best of post-war American landscape architecture. By abstracting natural and art historical forms and even natural processes, and by combining those with a sense of how people respond to and move through space, Collins created a designed landscape that brings visitors closer to the essential qualities of nature itself. Collins pioneered innovative, ecology-based environmental engineering and landscape management practices at Innisfree. In the 1940s, decades before such techniques first appeared in scientific literature, Collins began to control algae growth in Tyrrell Lake, the central garden feature at Innisfree, by controlling water chemistry through both mechanical and natural processes. Collins continued a plant hybridizing program started by Marion Beck, focused on creating ecotypes ideally adapted to Innisfree's environment. As a result, over time, key plant varieties have naturalized throughout the site. Beginning in 1960, when garden staff and funds were suddenly and dramatically reduced, Collins developed long-term management techniques for various ecosystems that transformed wild areas into revolutionary new types of gardens. Balancing higher and lower maintenance areas, Collins transformed existing cup gardens and created new ones by altering growing conditions so new plant communities would emerge over time. Instead of requiring the installation of mass plantings, Collins gardens depend on particular plants thriving in new growing conditions, plants naturalizing and activating the native seed bed. The resulting gardens require specific but remarkably little maintenance and run effectively with a small staff. To maintain the desired aesthetic effects, the plant schemes are gently edited and do not need the continuous and fussy maintenance typical of designed gardens. Many of these practices involve precise interventions in natural succession to create distinct plant communities with distinct aesthetic qualities. Collins' various innovations are remarkably similar to sustainable practices considered cutting edge today. By harnessing natural processes, Collins created resilient, low-maintenance plant communities that produced the aesthetic effects he desired. As a result, Innisfree is attracting a new wave of attention from international leaders in the horticultural and scientific communities because Collins' work offers a powerful, cost-effective model for other private and public landscapes supported by decades of proven success. The original core of the garden is based around the terraces at the former location of the Beck home. And the plantings around these terraces are a little more formal than elsewhere, but there's a looseness to the design as Collins sort of adapted it into the public garden era with the naturalized and draped plantings you see here. And the terraces have a series of steps. This is one of the grottos built into the terrace there. And leading down from the terrace area, there's this lawn to the point, so we'll be sort of heading down toward the water. Innisfree and the entirety of Collins' work embodies modern ideas in landscape architecture. Lester Collins attended Harvard's Graduate School of Design right between his close contemporaries Dan Kiley, James Rose, Garrett Ekbo, and Lawrence Halprin, sharing an educational experience that truly ushered in the age of modern landscape architecture. As these individuals sought design models that broke from the rigid formalism of the Beaux-Arts style and ways to imbue design landscapes with narrative meaning that told of a connection between people and nature, not a domination of nature and the populace. Like the best of his contemporaries, Collins thought about natural systems on a broad scale, and his work supported the healthy functioning of these ecosystems. This area here at the point was one of Walter Beck's primary gardens, and one which Collins recognized as Beck's best work. And these three rocks are Owl, Dragon, and Turtle Rock. These little rocks underneath the Dragon Rock were Collins' first addition to the site in 1938 when he visited. This bridge here was the completion of the trail around the lake in 1969, crossing the channel, and connected the more heavily designed areas around the terraces with the more naturalistic ones on the other side of the lake. On Pine Island, which is connected by that bridge, he created multiple paths, removed heavy undergrowth, and limbed the pines to create a soaring sculptural character and encouraged native plants in this area. Down from there, we enter the Corn Crib Bog, which actually has a modified historic corn crib, sort of serving as a bridge. And there are 3 bog gardens created in this area that require different interventions at different time intervals, so there's always similar but different things going on. From there, the path moves into the Hemlock Woods, which have a rougher, steep, rocky topography in contrast to Pine Island. And then we get to the house where Collins would stay when he was on the property. And it is this very sort of muted color brown to sort of blend in with the landscape. He was certainly not trying to draw attention to it or to himself, but on the inside it's painted in bright primary colors. So there's these elements of yin and yang even in the places that you cannot see. In the nearly 70 years since Innisfree opened to the public, the garden has delighted and captured the imagination of experts and non-experts alike. Innisfree has been recognized as a visionary and an influential design of 20th century landscape art and remains as a testament to Collins' skill, inventiveness, and vision. We have letters of support from the Garden Conservancy and Charles Birnbaum from the Cultural Landscape Foundation, and I'm delighted to say that we have Kate Karen, Innisfree's landscape conservator, here today. If there's anything you would like to say, I invite you to please do so. Come to me.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you to the staff. I mean, there's been a lot of praise for the staff, but I can say that Jennifer, in a tremendous way, and Kathleen Frank, who I've only spoken to on the phone, we've talked about footnotes and exciting stuff like that, but everyone's been great. And, you know, I think I'm a landscape architect, I'm a history geek, I'm a plant geek. This is the most important place I've ever had the privilege of being involved with. And Jennifer's told you all about it, you're all welcome to come visit. But I want you to know that the nonprofit foundation that opened the garden in 1960, we're still sort of in our infancy. Lester Collins ran the garden, and he was a landscape architect with an international practice. So he wasn't developing the stewardship arm. We were very lucky that he developed all these wonderful maintenance practices, and then his wife ran the garden for another 20 years, and she kept going with those maintenance practices. So the garden really looks the way he intended it to. But as stewards, all we have is that. We don't have the storytelling mechanism in place. We certainly don't have the fundraising mechanism in place. So recognition on the National Register is an important step for us institutionally, and thank you. I hope for your consideration. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you for visiting. All right, we've seen the presentation and have looked at the form for Innisfree. Please.
I am a veteran of the unsuccessful battle to save the Beck's house, 1982 or thereabouts. There was a lot of community concern about it. We recognized that money was the issue, and there wasn't an immediate purpose for the house, but it was it fitted into the landscape wonderfully, and it was felt then, some of us still feel, I think, that a use could have been found that would be complementary to the gardens. The gardens are a great success. It was at about that time that most of the Beck's land was sold to Rockefeller University, as the nomination makes clear. And I'm just wondering if any of that land, and it was Lester Collins who drew the line, so he must have known that he was excluding anything that was of particular design importance in the transfer to Rockefeller University. But do we think today, in fact, that we've lost anything in terms of ownership within Innisfree? Kate will probably know that better than anyone.
Yeah. I mean, we are including, so the area where the gatehouse is is not owned by Innisfree Foundation and some of the road. So we are reaching onto Rockefeller's property to be able to have that, because it is very much part of the experience of entering onto the property. My discussion with Kate and others on site was that while there was that other land of about 700 acres, as I recall, quite a bit of land was given to or sold to the Rockefeller University. There's no designed elements that are really related to that central garden. So if something comes up down the road where something we're made aware of that, that's something that we would look into, expanding the boundary. But this boundary seemed most appropriate for Innisfree as both a private and a public garden.
And the university is in agreement with the nomination?
I have not received a word of opposition from them.
Did you want to add anything, Kate, to that? Or?
No, I think that was very accurate.
I just want to add that if you think these pictures are fake, they're not. As a, it's my own little personal story. As a naive little graduate student in 1986, I wrote my first paper about landscape on Innisfree, and I had to give a presentation. When I showed up to take the slides, it was pouring raining. I went around dutifully with my umbrella and took the slides, and they still came out beautiful and gorgeous. So this is absolutely the way it looks. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life, so I'm very thrilled to see this go.
I do want to ask, are those stock photos from some archive, or did you take them as part of the form?
These are all taken by Kate.
Well, actually, I think the best ones were taken by Oliver Collins, Lester Collins' son, and the ones that live sort of washed out. but no, he just,
Yeah, it's hard to take a bad picture of this place. And I think we all appreciate the presentation of so many photos and the walkthrough. That was really great. Okay, Wint moves. Tom Mag seconds.
Tom or Jen? Jen.
Will you relinquish your seconding?
I would relinquish this to this.
Jennifer Lemack seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed
Wint's
or
head was in
abstains?
front of Tom, so I saw her.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Next up is the Fort Wood Creek nomination form in Oneida County, Rome, New York.
If you don't know Andy, he's one of the archaeologists, works for Nancy Herder, and he did a really wonderful job writing this form, I think.
Good morning.
And we're keeping him. Nancy's not here. I placed my claim on him.
The Fort Wood Creek property is a French and Indian War British fortification located west of the city of Rome and at the western end of the Oneida Portage. Built in October 1755, originally as Fort Bull, but then later rebuilt as Fort Wood Creek, the site helped secure a British military presence in the Mohawk Valley. This slide gives you kind of a skewed perspective of the Oneida Portage. Note that north is to the bottom of the page, and you've got Fort Wood Creek at the western end of the Oneida Portage here, with the Mohawk River flowing to the east over here and Wood Creek flowing west over there. The property is being nominated to the National Register under Criterion A for its association with the events surrounding the military history of the United States, with a specific connection to the French and Indian War during the mid-18th century. The Fort Wood Creek property is also being nominated under Criterion D for its potential to provide important archaeological information. The physical remains of Fort Wood Creek represent an undisturbed and intact French and Indian War resource that is largely unchanged since its 18th century occupation, with limited impacts from development. And there is a very high potential for the Wood Creek parcel to contain intact archaeological data and features that can help contribute to our understanding of this all too important colonial conflict, one that I think is all too often forgotten about in our history. Now, as a way to give you a very brief history, thumbnail sketch history of the site, what I want to do is make one point of clarification. There were two forts built at this property by the British during the French and Indian War. The first was Fort Bull, which is the plan view is shown here. This was built in October of 1755. It was built by the British. The map is in French because the map was drafted by the French commander who destroyed Fort Bull. The fort was occupied until March of 1756. And you can see it's kind of an irregular shaped fort, a two-row palisade with no moat around it, or not a large fort capable of mounting cannon. This fort, obviously the French recognized the importance of the Oneida Portage as well, and the French led a raiding party down through the Black River Valley in March of 1756 and destroyed this fort. They killed the entire garrison, blew up the fort by lighting the magazine, and tossed all of the fort's provisions that were destined for the British at Oswego into the muddy waters of Wood Creek, which is down here. And that's part of the reason why the French attacked the fort, is that the provisions were there, destined eventually for Oswego. The French obviously didn't hold control of this portage. They destroyed the fort and then headed back to Canada. And so the British quickly reoccupied this portage and built the second fort, Fort Wood Creek, which is the plan view of which is shown here. This is a more traditional Vauban style fort with the big corner bastions, a water moat surrounding it in three sides, and also a nice dam feature with a floodgate constructed across Wood Creek to control the water levels of Wood Creek and to fill in the dam as well. This fort was also occupied for a very short period of time. When the French took Oswego under Montcalm, the British basically retreated down the Mohawk Valley and ran. And in the process, they blew up all their forts to not leave anything for the French and headed back down the Mohawk Valley. So Fort Wood Creek was built and occupied for a very short period of time and then destroyed and abandoned by the British. It's largely has been left intact since that period of time, and the integrity of the site is truly remarkable. But I want to make it clear that it's the remains of Fort Wood Creek, this fort here, that are visible at the site and that are the subject of this National Register nomination. Fort Bull, the original fort constructed, it's likely, I assume, that the Fort Wood Creek was built on top of Fort Bull, and the historical sources suggest that, but that remains an open question that hasn't been answered. As I said, the integrity of the site is quite remarkable. This is an aerial view of the property, and for those with the eagle eye, you can actually see the outline of the fort. Pointers, there it is. It's right about there. But what I wanted to do to show you the truly intact nature of these physical remains is I wanted to show you sort of a digital version of this view. And so what I'm showing you here is a hillshade view of the digital elevation data, which basically just makes the topography pop out. And it makes it very clear where the star-shaped fort is. It's very hard to miss. And if you also notice, I'm just going to highlight it here for you. You also notice the linear feature that is built across Wood Creek. That's that dam and floodgate feature that was built across the creek to control. They used it to control the water levels and also to fill in the moat. The integrity is truly remarkable. And when you superimpose the historic maps, they line right up. It's right there. And I think certainly within the footprint of these physical remains, an intact archaeological record is a logical assumption. Now, in terms of potential research, of course, the location of Fort Bull is something that could and should be resolved. But in terms of bigger questions, the Fort Wood Creek site offers a window into those large-scale processes of British Empire building during the 18th century. The settlement served an admittedly very small but a functional role in the imperial designs of the British Empire. And as such, I think it has something to say about this transatlantic colonial process. As a specifically military frontier settlement, Fort Wood Creek can be viewed as integral to the larger process of colonial expansion, representing how the British imperial state physically maintained its presence in the contested frontier of colonial New York. Now, at the same time, peripheral frontier settlements like Fort Wood Creek, these were socially dynamic communities that experienced micro-scale processes of culture contact and interaction. And scholars only now fully recognize this dynamic aspect to frontier communities, not only as arenas where culture contact occurs, but also where new cultural forms can emerge. So in short, frontier context, sites like Fort Wood Creek are now understood as important venues for cultural creolization and ethnogenesis. Of course, we can't answer all the big research questions with data from Fort Wood Creek. The length of the occupation simply precludes the accumulation of enough archaeological data, but I still think a site like Fort Wood Creek necessarily needs to be understood in the context of these types of questions. And I just wanted to make one final note about the boundary. The boundary is defined by the parcel that's owned by the Rome Historical Society, which encompasses the largest documented archaeological site associated with Fort Wood Creek, the Fort Wood Creek remains. Although an arbitrary boundary, this boundary encompasses the remains of Fort Wood Creek and the associated dam feature. During the historical occupation, it's likely that the site's footprint extended beyond the current parcel boundary. However, surrounding land to the north, all this land to the north and to the east, is currently held in private hands and is not part of the Rome Historical Society parcel. Previous archaeological testing has been conducted in this general region and generally confirms that there's no features in that location. But for the most part, the access to this land is very limited. And that is the Fort Wood Creek site. Are there any questions?
To the top?
Yes.
And that's an earlier alignment, the line that sort of is cutting across between the...
Here?
Yes.
Yes, Clinton's Ditch.
Okay.
Any thought of expanding to include all that and making this a broad archaeological district? Sorry, Kat's like,
Well, that would be way outside
Yeah.
the period of significance.
Yeah.
You know, the barge canal is listed.
Yeah.
And then the Erie Canal is eligible, and it's way different, you know, significance and context. And we don't, I mean, the reason this is an arbitrary boundary is we have no permission to test on
Right.
that land right to the immediate east.
Yeah, all through here.
And we did have a conversation with, so I mean, expanding that, where, you know, where would
Yeah,
you,
yeah. No,
what
it's-
part of the barge canal would you include? You know, just that little part? It wasn't there during the period of significance. But Andy and I did have a conversation with Julie Ernstein, who is the National Park Service archaeologist, and she's also the acting, not the keeper of the register, but the head of the chief of the register program at the moment, about this whole boundary issue. And she has agreed with our boundary because testing has revealed in the northwest that there is nothing, and because we don't have permission at the moment from the private landowner to test in the northeast part. So we did go over that with the Park Service archaeologists, so.
Great.
How long has the society owned that land?
It's been many decades. I don't know exactly the date, but it's been a while that
Yeah,
they've owned it.
Well, not like 50 years, because we thought about it like Emily had proposed it as a commemorative property, and we thought maybe we could make something of that, but none of that really panned out in terms of how you draw boundaries for an archaeological site. So it was kind of, we had all this good information, we had a good nomination, we had the ability to protect it by listing it now, and so we decided that it was the right thing to do, was to try to create an argument and get permission to do it, and that's what we did.
Well, it's a very proactive organization, and they've got great collections and a fine building in Rome. And I think along with our presumed approval of this, recommendation that it be approved, should be a commendation to them for doing this sort of thing. I think it's great.
I just like just a couple comments. First is this: I think this is an excellent nomination, and I think also just to observe that there are dozens of sites like this from this conflict scattered around New York State. Of course, the North American component of the French and Indian War largely took place in New York, and it is, as Andy observes, kind of one of the forgotten conflicts of American history, viewed by some as the first act of the American Revolution, because it set the stage for it.
How dynamic is the creek? I know that you're thinking that some of the materials that were dumped there would be remaining as artifacts and features, and I also get the impression from looking at the nomination form that there's high water and low water periods, probably seasonal.
Yeah, I don't think it's as active as it was. I think the main channel now is sort of down. Oops, I'm sorry. It's sort of down. Yeah, down here now.
Oh, good.
So this sort of part, this kind of comes back here. This is sort of like an island here. I think this extent of it is much less active than it was in the past.
Well, that's good for the archaeological record.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
great. Thank you.
Andy, was that first map in the nomination? Because I don't remember seeing it. And
The very, very first one?
Yeah, the
First
very,
slide?
very first one.
No, I think it's just referenced in the nomination, but not actually shown.
Yeah, because I thought that was very helpful in laying out the whole portage and how this all worked. There didn't seem to be an overarching map in the nomination, so.
Yeah, I found the maps sometimes confusing because they all, whichever map you look at, north is either down or up.
Yeah.
It's always, so they
Yeah, that was
can get a little confusing. This one does help kind of give you the
This
bigger
one
picture.
helps.
Yeah,
Gives-
okay.
gives you the
French, they do it
context,
all
I
the
thought.
time.
We can add that, Jay.
That'd be great.
That's a
Sure.
good comment. All right, Fort Wood Creek.
And I just want, even though Nancy's not here, I want to thank her for loaning us Andy for this project.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion? Chuck got on there, and Jay seconds that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun,
Yeah,
because
that's a
even
great
I
one.
could understand the archaeology. Oh, there it is.
Next up is the Methodist Episcopal Church of Jacksonville.
Nope.
I'm sorry,
That's
St.
second.
Anthony's.
Yeah.
St. Anthony's Convent and School in Syracuse, and Virginia Bartos is going to present.
Yes. Yeah, now we're heading a little west of Rome. My first nomination this morning is the St. Anthony Convent and Convent School located in the northwest side of Syracuse. The property is being nominated under Criterion A for education for its association with the Sisters of St. Francis and their focus on female college preparatory instruction. This circa 1935 aerial view shows the 1927 convent school here, okay, and the 1896 mother house. Yep. There, just had to move my hand. Okay. Just a quick recap. The Sisters of St. Francis were invited to Syracuse in 1860 to teach school at one of the parishes in the community and acquired their property in 1862, this property. Okay. This aerial view shows the current campus and the expansion of the convent as the sisters needed additional buildings for training novitiates as teachers and girls for post-secondary education. That's kind of an awkward sentence, but I think you get my meaning there. The 1896 mother house is here, okay? And clearly visible is the 1949 chapel. And right here is the connecting walkway that goes from the mother house into the chapel. Okay. Here we have the sisters in the novitiates wing, which dates from 1959. Here again is the 1927 school, and here's the 1962 library edition. Okay. In the upper left, which is here, this is the Franciscan Academy that was originally built in 1958 as a high school. And the property is also being nominated under Criterion C for architecture, as these buildings exemplify leading styles when built and are all designed by well-known architects such as H.P. Weber, who did the school, and Archimedes Russell, who did the mother house. Speaking of Mr. Russell, he was selected as the designer for the mother house by the sisters on the recommendation of the bishop. For those of us in the Capitol District, Russell was known for being one of the architects completing the Capitol building. The 3 1/2 story U-shaped building was modified as needed. The staircases were added in 1918 to the end of each of the wings, and it still retains much of its historic Romanesque revival features, such as rounded windows, full-height round corner towers with peaked caps, having masonry foundation on the exterior, and interior features also survive, especially with the extensive use of wood, wainscoting, door ceilings, stairs, built-in cabinets, etc. A 2-story brick walkway connects the mother house to the 1949 chapel, designed in the Gothic Revival style by Syracuse architect Napoleon Lovat. This building falls late in his career as he retired from practice in 1955. The interior rib-vaulted ceiling and recessed Gothic arched walls are clad with Guastavino tile. And the image on the right looks away from the chancel toward the organ loft, where the sisters could access the chapel from the second floor of the walkway. I'm refraining on going into detail in each of these buildings, as these are all described in the nomination draft, or the nomination text. Also connected to the mother house is the 4-story mid-century modern brick sisters and novitiates wing. It is a 1959 design by Peterson, Huber, and Hares, also from Syracuse. The low 2-story portion, that's this here, okay, contains a novitiates chapel with its small windows of various sizes and a seemingly random pattern. The interior of the buildings has features typical of the period, such as tile floors, concrete walls, steel and concrete stairs, aluminum frame windows, to name a few. And the lower left shows the 1993 Wilson Care Center glass structure. The 1958 Franciscan Academy was later renamed the Franciscan Center, and it's also a mid-century modern design of Peterson, Huber, and Harris. It's basically a 3-story L-shaped building with a single-story entrance and large fan-shaped auditorium, from which extends a 3-story classroom wing, which is pictured in the lower right. The lower left shows the entrance with its large glass and aluminum windows and doors. The upper right is the interior view of the auditorium that was used for various functions, including graduation ceremonies for the school. Now here we see the 1962 library constructed in preparation for the convent school being used for Maria Regina College, a 2-year women's college operated by the sisters between 1963 and 1990. It was originally built with 2 stories, and a 3rd floor was added 1 year later. And the lower image is an interior view showing typical finishes of the period: travertine floors, concrete encased steel support beams, large open spaces that were partitioned as necessary. The library is connected to the facade of the 1927 convent school, seen in the upper left. And the upper right image shows the auditorium and gymnasium wing, with the auditorium pictured below. Next to it is a classroom with wood floor, blackboard, and glass block and aluminum windows. The building was a design of Albany architect H.P. Weber, who occasionally worked for the Syracuse Roman Catholic Diocese. The buildings are in good condition, largely attributed to the complex being used and occupied by the Sisters of St. Francis until 2015. It's now under private ownership, and a Part 1 federal tax credit application was recently submitted. The City of Syracuse is a certified local government and sent a letter of support for listing the St. Anthony Convent and Convent School. I'd like to introduce you to Daniel Wilson of Lacey, Thaler, Ryler, and Wilson. They are active in this project. And Daniel, would you like to say some words?
Thank you. Yeah, well, we're really excited to be a part of this. I don't believe the owner's representative can make it today, so we're acting on behalf of them. But we are currently, once this gets nominated, we will currently be working on development plans. The last time I talked to them, which has been a couple months ago, they were anticipating rehabilitating and renovating the site to be a mixed use of housing, and they were even strongly looking into senior or retirement housings. And then also there was a chance that there was a school that wanted to lease the property on the school portion, the 1950s school.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, that is the St. Anthony's Convent and School in Syracuse, Onondaga County, New York. Any questions or comments about that? Do we hear a motion to recommend? Wayne Goodman, second. Kristen? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. Unanimous?
Thank you.
And now, on to the Methodist
Now on to the
Episcopal Church
Methodist
of Jacksonville, Tompkins County.
Worth waiting for.
Indeed.
Okay, now we have the former Methodist Episcopal Church of Jacksonville, a hamlet in northeast Tompkins County. The building's being nominated under Criterion A for settlement, and its association for the spread of religion, specifically Methodist meetings and churches. That was the result of circuit riders throughout the region in the early settlement period. All that is explained in the nomination text. The building is located near the one and only main intersection in the hamlet and was moved to its location in 1899, 1/4 mile south of its original location, which is now occupied by the Methodist Community Church, or the Jacksonville Community Church. It was originally built in 1828, and in the 1850s, the members decided to remodel the quote-unquote old colonial church rather than demolish and build a new building. The remodeling was done by Daniel Elmore of Trumansburg, and the building is significant under Criterion C in architecture for its Greek Revival design and being documented as one of some of Elmore's work. He was active in Trumansburg between about 1844 and 1888 when he died. And it's amazing that for someone as active as he was, that there aren't more buildings documented as his work. There is one church in Trumansburg which is listed in the National Register and was his. Anyway, the building was divided into 2 floors. Elmore constructed 2 wide winding staircases to the 2nd floor, which became worship space. The 1st floor was presumably used for meetings and Sunday school. The building is currently undergoing rehabilitation, and the owner is retaining as much of the historic fabric as possible. And there's a lot of it left in spite of its condition. Wood floors, ceilings, the wonderful turned support posts in the 1st floor, and as you can see, the wide paneled wood doors into the main gathering space. Actually, you can't see them, you can see through them, okay? But those, there are a set of double doors that close, and those are original. Okay. Now you can see the work in progress. The building was used for worship until the 1890s when the Methodist Episcopal Church built a new building, which is still extant. Afterwards, the old church was purchased by a group of citizens who incorporated as the Village Hall Association. They bought and planned to move and use this building as an all-purpose meeting space. The term Village Hall Association is a little misleading. They're not a government organization, they were a local community group. And it shows the importance of this building to the hamlet of Jacksonville, that this group would form this association and move and keep the building. They used it until 1949 when it was sold to a private owner who used it as a residence and an antique shop, and then resold it in the 1980s for use as a bait and tackle shop. And there are little remnants of the bait and tackle shop left, like right here. Okay. But what is incredible is with the molded wallboard now down, you can see some of the wonderful framing, this curved molding frame here. This, well, anyway, that's Daniel Elmore's work there. And it's hard to see the rafters through all of that, but there was a little explanation about another thing that was used commonly by Elmore was the double V rafter with the metal support. You can't see it, but not in my picture. When there's no lights in the building, it's really hard to photograph. Okay. Anyway, the current owner plans to use the 1st floor as a residence and has applied for the New York State homeowner's tax credit for that portion of the building. Eventually, he would like to use the upper floor as income producing and use the federal tax credit, but at the moment, he's concentrating on securing the building from the elements and completing the residential portion. So that is the Methodist Episcopal Church of Jacksonville.
Tom Baggs moves. Any discussion? Anybody want to ask a question or talk about this a little bit? We have a motion. Do I have a second? Jay DiLorenzo. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, on to the Glenwood Cemetery, and then we will break for lunch.
Last of my nominations is the Glenwood Cemetery in Homer and Cortland County, which covers roughly 30 acres and is currently maintained by the Village of Homer. The cemetery is designed by Cortland native and self-taught landscape designer Paris Barber, beginning in 1862 on land that he donated to the newly formed Glenwood Cemetery Association. It's being nominated under Criterion C and Criterion Consideration D as a late rural cemetery, incorporating design elements introduced at Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati in 1858 and adopted nationwide. Some of the elements are using the contours and natural features of the land, long approaches to the cemetery sections, fewer trees, and dense plantings to literally open the view. Barber's main approach to the cemetery was from the northwest corner. Like some of Andy's maps here, north goes this way. You can see a little bit of the area. So the main entrance came in here. Okay. That was part of Barber's plan. And it connected to 2 main roadways, one which literally created a figure 8. So you have the road going around this section here, and then you've got your figure 8. And then there was another major roadway, or main roadway, that created a serpentine to go up the hill. You're literally going uphill when you drive up this roadway. Okay. There is a natural feature here of a brook and a ravine, which literally divides the cemetery into north and south. So when you see the little N's and the S's, that's what you're looking at the sections, but they don't always line up with the north and south halves of it. Now, I don't have a photo to show of you of Paris Barber, so you'll have to settle for his gravestone, his footstone. And also there is this wonderful boulder monument that has a plaque acknowledging Paris Barber and his design for Glenwood Cemetery. And there's the boulder. It's right near the entrance, so you can't miss it when you come in. But it is a little low because I missed it the first time I was there. Anyway, it occupies a space where Barber hoped to add a fountain, but the fountain had to be eliminated due to lack of funds due to war. Both sides of the approach lead to the 1907 receiving vault. Okay. And that is actually where 4 roadways come together. Barely visible near the tree is the 1906 Civil War monument that was moved to its present location in 1959 from the veteran section up the hill. Barber kept the plantings, mostly trees, to along the edges of the sections and along the roadways. Monuments were generally arranged facing the roadways, or in this case, overlooking the ravine. And even with the mature trees, the view is impressive. Some plots had the burials arranged in a circle around the family monument rather than in rows. And as with other cemeteries of similar age, the majority of the older family monuments tend to be obelisks, often topped with urns or drapery. As mentioned in the draft, the first burials in Glenwood were in 1863, before the cemetery was dedicated, and that was 1867. And that was the result of soldiers' remains being interred following the Battle of Gettysburg. The monument on the right is dedicated to General Willoughby Babcock, who died in 1864 after being wounded at the Battle of Winchester. Babcock is one of 4 persons of transcendent importance buried in Glenwood. He served briefly as military governor of Pensacola, Inspector General of Cavalry in the Department of the Gulf. The other persons are the artist Francis Bicknell Carpenter, whose painting First Reading of the Emancipation Proclamation is on view in the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And then we have David Hannum, the one-time proud owner of the Cardiff Giant, and Anna Stone Quinton, who was co-founder of the Women's National Indian Association, and their stories are included in this nomination. The image on the right shows the one section of Glenwood that was not designed by Paris Barber, but by Frederick Knight, who also assisted in the layout of Oakwood Cemetery in Syracuse. In 1880, a small number of reinterred remains from the village churchyards remained in a dedicated lower section, and Barber's widow paid for hiring Knight to add the new section, which is, I believe, Section 8, and that's right here. Okay. Most of the churchyard burials were already moved by family members to family plots in Glenwood, such as Rhoda and Joseph Beebe, who were one of the first settlers in Homer, and they were reinterred with the family in Section 6. So these were the last, the poor unfortunates who didn't have family members to move them. Okay. Early in the 20th century, a service road was laid into the ravine and a superintendent's house built. And around that same time, a retaining wall was added in an attempt to keep the brook from flooding. Also visible is one of 2 stone arches, which are also contributing features to Glenwood. Arch bridges, that is. Okay. Glenwood has only 2 sculptural figures on the grounds, and both of them are representations of hope. The figure on the right was made in 1875 by Joseph Watson, who had a monument and marble works factory in Homer, which is shown in the photograph in the lower right. The local historical society is researching Watson with the objective of adding him to the nomination text. I haven't gotten anything yet. Glenwood has 3 mausoleums. the Gothic Earl Abbey on the top of the hill on the south side of the grounds that was built in 1923 and designed by Fred Lear. This is Earl Abbey. Fred Lear taught at Syracuse University School of Architecture. Then we have the 1914 Styron Mausoleum with its impressive freestanding marble columns. And then the Jedediah Barber Mausoleum, designed by Paris Barber for his father in 1869. Glenwood is still an active cemetery with roughly 7,800 burials, and I'll leave you with this view looking towards the village of Homer, which is the sponsor of this nomination. Do we have questions or comments about Glenwood Cemetery?
Do I have a motion to accept Glenwood Cemetery? Tom Maggs, a second, please. Kristen Herron. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed, abstained? All right, we'll break for lunch and return here at 1:30. Call the meeting back to order. Give our kind attention to Bill Crabtree, who's going to present on the Joseph C. Yates House in Schenectady.
Although I will, a quick correction, we will just call it merely the Yates House. It was first presented to me as potentially being the summer home of Joseph C. Yates. I've been trying to establish that, so he actually had 2 residences he lived in the stockade and one associated with Albany as well. So the Yates House, simply, in Glenville, town of Glenville. This has recently been purchased by the town of Glenville, and they are hoping to use designation to access potential EPF funding moving forward. I told John, in the interest of finally providing him with a faithful account of what I say, I'm going to try to begin my presentation by reading from some notes for John. The Yates House is an architecturally and historically significant building erected on land first settled by that family during the 1730s. This tract of land, settled by Joseph Yates in 1734, was once an extensive farm which boasted approximately 3 miles of frontage on the Mohawk River near its confluence with the Owlplatz Kill, or the area known as Owlplatz historically. And this was at the time within the bounds of what became the city of Schenectady. It was a ward within Schenectady. The brick dwelling appears to have been erected for Yellis Yates, or shortly thereafter by an heir, and it shares anecdotal associations with one of the Yates family's preeminent figures, Joseph C. Yates, a person of considerable influence in the early history of Schenectady, and the 7th governor of New York, and as Tom pointed out, someone who voted against the word canal. The 2-story core section of the house illustrates the regional acceptance of new architectural fashions in the post-Revolutionary War era. Even as late as the 1790s, Schenectady's built environment in large measure remained a reflection of its provincial Dutch origins. Today, the house and the 2-acre parcel are the core remnants of this once extensive farm property, along with the nearby family cemetery and a barn, which has since been converted into a residence. The Yates House being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of social history for its salient relationship with the Yates family, which ranks among the region's most socially, politically, and economically prominent in the 18th and 19th centuries. It is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of an early 19th century brick federal-style dwelling, which was subsequently augmented with historic period additions. Viewed in the context of its time, the house when first built represented a significant paradigm shift in the regional architectural landscape and illustrates the permeation of new design influences in the post-Revolutionary War era. So what we have today is basically a house built in 3 sections. We have the core brick section, which was probably built by Yellis Yates somewhere 1800, 1810. We have a frame wing, which we know was added subsequently, probably about 1860. We know it's subsequent because it wound up covering 2 of the window bays of the earlier brick house. And then the east extension, which was built about 1890 on the other end with its angled bay feature. Let's go through a few images. I will say I've only spent but a few hours in this house. This house really deserves some more intensive and comprehensive forensics. I personally would recommend full historic structures report and conditions assessments. As you've seen in the documentation and read, the building in later years was converted by the 1920s into a restaurant, and in more recent times had functioned basically as an apartment facility with all manner of additions added to the back and the side. So, like I say, I think there's a fair amount of forensic work to really tease some of this out. I should point out the bottom pictures are from the Historic American Building Survey, probably circa 1940, which give us a fair sense of the building as it existed at that time. This was really an exercise in trying to sleuth out what was still there, because the house is a composite of these three periods, the historic periods, as well as the later changes, the more recent changes. A comparison view of the staircase, both the Habs image and the current iteration. You see it's really there, it's on its alignment, the railing has been changed. Actually, a section of that original railing I found up in the attic, in the top part of the stair. A lot of this was looking at molding profiles and extant trim and trying to really establish a case based on that. But like I say, I'm not going to delude myself into thinking this can be achieved in 2 hours. We need to study this building. We've tried to give you as good a picture as we can of it at this period. So there is original federal trim, especially upstairs. Appears to be 2 generations of mid-century trim. And on the left, we have an image of a characteristic finish feature in the 1890 wing. The one sort of outstanding thing that needs to be addressed here, if this is in fact finalized, this nomination is approved, is where to end our period of significance. We're looking at some colonial revival work, which we think probably dates to the 1920s. We still just want to substantiate that before rounding that out. So that is the Yates House. They say it's in a poor state of repair. It has suffered in recent years, but I certainly think it's an important building and certainly still has a story to tell.
Are you suggesting that the period of significance would be expanded to include the 1920s?
Probably yes, because I think we would say this fabric, if in fact almost 100 years old, is significant and part of the building's history.
And on the other side of the timeline, you initially looked at this as possibly 1730s or?
No, it's very interesting for a house of its stature. I was told, hey, this was built in 1730.
Yeah.
It was not. It was a much humbler house and probably a Dutch barn and an earlier farmstead. This is a later period of history.
My question is, if this were built in 1730, what would it look like? Not of that.
No, it'd be probably a small 2-room Dutch house or something of that nature. Well, we knew very little about it. Shockingly enough, there was a lot of just unknowns about it.
And there was an associated cemetery that is now part of a housing subdivision?
Yeah, so basically, Tom might want to speak to this, but basically that area has been substantially built up. The cemetery, I couldn't even get to it from the house site. It's down a ravine and basically fenced off within a cluster subdivision.
Senator Amador, one of our New York State senators, Senator Amador, has built a niche of, these kind of places where you drive your car in the garage and miraculously you get to well, I don't know how you do that, but you do. They're very small and they sort of are surrounded on one way. Behind that, would be going west, and correct me if I'm mistaken, are the old Boston and Maine line up in the back. The barn to the north has been converted into a home. There is a cemetery that supposedly some of the Yates are buried up there. I guess they are. Joseph Yates' daughter was an Episcopalian and removed him to New York in a more rarefied setting than being on the other side of the tracks, I assume, because on the other side is the former D&H tracks, which are now Canadian Pacific tracks. So they're sort of in the middle of the tracks. And it's very close to the road. The premises on this is that the town supervisor has taken this on as a project to, I've heard things like a senior citizen gathering center. Bill, you probably have far more knowledge.
No, actually, I haven't heard too much about potential uses.
When it first came to my attention, I said, who do you have looking at this? And he said, Jack Waite. And I said, well, Jack Waite knows his business. And I spoke to Jack, and Jack said that he had information on this building that he had put together some time ago. So I mentioned that to Bill, who knows stuff. But they have a more avant-garde architectural group in Fair City, Schenectady, working on that, I understand. So
it's a work in progress, but I agree with you. You'd be ashamed to see it deteriorate any further.
Other questions or comments about the Yates House? Do I hear a motion to recommend? Tom Maggs moves. Paul Stewart seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you, Phil. Next up is school number 1, Troy, Rensselaer County.
Yep, school number 1 in Troy. This is a federal commercial tax credit project with an approved Part 3. Completed in 1911, Troy Public School number 1 was the first school edifice constructed as part of a 2-decade-long building campaign initiated to address burgeoning school enrollment in the city, a direct consequence of Troy's rapid industrialization and accompanying population growth. It incorporated any number of features influenced by increasing standards of school design in the period, among them those relating to fire safety, proper lighting and ventilation, and program-specific spaces. Public School number 1 was built to the design of M.F. Cummings & Son, a prolific and prominent architectural firm responsible for a wide range of commissions in Troy and elsewhere. Established by architect Marcus F. Cummings and later carried on by his son Frederick, this office's work included domestic, religious, commercial, and public buildings, among them 10 school commissions. The former school, which recently completed a certified rehabilitation to serve as apartments, is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of education, given its direct association with the development of Troy's public school system, which was then being transformed to address increasing enrollment. It is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture as an excellent example of progressive era school design and the work of the office of M.F. Cummings & Son, which provided a distinctive collegiate Gothic-inspired design, which also satisfied any number of important period school design mandates. We are looking at a perspective view on the bottom left of the principal elevation facing eastward, as well as the auditorium block which faces northwards, and of course this wonderful entrance portal which is embellished with this plaque with all this information specific really to the region and Troy in particular. So really this was meant obviously as sort of the flagship building for this significant campaign which would go on over the next nearly 20 years. A few other views, that is the auditorium block facing northwards with separate boys and girls entrances, and the opposite west elevation, as we see that elevator tower that was not added as part of the tax credit rehabilitation. That was a feature added after the time the school closed and before this rehab was executed. So what we basically have are remaining historic era features, which remain in situ. In addition, we look at the right picture is somewhat jarring because the auditorium was basically turned into 2 levels of space. So we're in the upper space with the top part of the proscenium arch and the ribbed ceiling basically right above us. Other finishes, we see chalkboards, period trim. So it's the usual balance to try to strike a judicious balance between what's there and what needs to be added to make it its new purpose, serve its new purpose. And that's it for school number 1. I didn't feel like we wanted to look at a lot of pictures of new apartments, but
It's sometimes interesting to see what they do with that. Okay, school number 1, sure.
I need to make a comment. Thank you. I had not seen before Troy's crest with its motto, Ilium is destroyed, Troy lives. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and it's right up there over the entrance.
yes, and also education is the palladium of Troy.
Yeah.
Can I say a word on this?
You guys are just getting here.
This area. I'm trying to keep up with that group over there in the corner. They got me on the scope. This area, it's amazing what's going on. Just north of there is a very tough area of Troy. North central Troy. A lot of very unfortunate.
You know Jenny lives there, right?
Yeah. No, there's always hope.
That explains it.
But south of that area, again, thanks to what you're all doing in this room, there have been a number of buildings that are really transforming that area, and I'm thrilled to see this moving northward because so much is being done just south of here, And these, I'll tell you a quick story. We have taken close to 50 throwaway people from this neighborhood, either shot, somebody says, you know, your mother's dead, we don't care, keep her. We've taken them and we buried them at Oakwood Cemetery in Troy with all the grace and dignity that one could ask. We have a doctor who's decided out of the goodness of his heart to provide monuments for every one of them. And that number keeps growing. We don't charge them anything. So God, this area, to see this transform, and that is a wonderful building. I drive by it. You're doing great work. It's good, wonderful, wonderful work.
I'll move it.
Wayne just makes a motion. Second. All in favor?
So I lost a few proposals along the way, so I picked up one from Kath at the last minute.
I want to thank Bill.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. I haven't done a fire tower for a while, but this is the Rock Rift Fire Observation Tower in the Walton vicinity of the town of Tompkins in Delaware County. It's being nominated in association with the multiple property documentation form Fire Observation Stations of the New York Forest Preserve, done by Wes Haynes in 2001. I think we've added quite a few towers since that time. This is actually on DEP water supplier land. They were a little leery at first, but I think Kat finally got them to acquiesce.
Yeah, they were under the impression that we had the same review powers as New York City landmarks, so that once, even though the town owns the tower, but DEP owns the land, and they thought we would be restricting and reviewing their use of the road, just as LPC restricts and reviews anything. And they were amazed. I said, no, we don't have that kind of power. So I think we're good with DEP now.
Okay, the tower is historically significant for its direct association with forest fire observation and prevention measures established by New York State beginning in the early years of the 20th century. These measures were enacted to protect state-owned forest lands from fire and corresponded with the continuing development of the state's forest preserve system, which was given concrete form in the later 19th century. The nominated tower is additionally significant as an intact example of prefabricated fire tower design by the International Derrick Company of Columbus, Ohio, a leading manufacturer of galvanized steel fire towers and other tower structures in this period. It was one of 9 new observation stations that were supplied by the federal government to New York State in 1934 and staffed the following 1935 season. The tower was decommissioned from active use in 1988, and since that time, the associated cabin has been lost, though its site remains clearly discernible. The Rock Rift Fire Observation Tower is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of conservation for its association with forest fire prevention methods implemented by New York State in the 20th century. It is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of a standardized galvanized steel observation tower fabricated by the International Derrick Company. We are obviously looking at a view of the tower, and also we see here scrawled in the concrete is the evidence that the tower was actually erected by the Civilian Conservation Corps. There was a camp nearby, I think it was at Davenport Cap. I'm trying to think where it was. Davenport. 2 other photos. The cabin, I believe, was burned down by vandals. But we also have an image of, I believe, the last DEC ranger who was stationed there, Linda Trask. I love the picture because it shows, not only the value of these towers for fire protection, but the educational components in terms of teaching children about the forest preserve, fire prevention measures, and really getting them, engaged with the preserve. So it's really a wonderful photo. As I've said to my colleagues, I'd be happy as a fire operations staff person. I could take a year and do it. It would be great. Unfortunately, aircraft and other things have made these stations obsolete. The plan here is working at the town, and a committee is working, obviously, to rehab this tower and get it back in service for recreational purposes.
Are the objects in the lower right photo still there?
No, I do not believe they are. No, I don't know where those have gone. Maybe Chuck knows.
I actually don't know. There are a few that the department has in collections. We have kind of a forest rangers collection in our Region 4 office. Nobody's even put it in.
One of the nice things about this form is your description of use those.
Yeah, that was
Basically triangulate the location.
Yes, our sponsor did an outstanding job in terms of articulating all the history and really laying it out for us.
So
We also had, there's a good history of the CCC in the Catskills that talked about all the camps and where they were and what they built, so we had that as well. So.
And given extant camp and ruins, why would criteria D not be included?
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I didn't give too much thought to it.
Well, I think because for criterion D, you need research questions.
Yeah,
Some kind of testing.
We're talking about a building that existed over, a crawl space probably, so how much material culture would be left from that? That was a fair question.
Well, I guess we're going to find out. Property listed under criteria D at today's meeting that had very little archaeology done, in fact, none, and it was based purely on surface features. Just saying.
Okay, fair point.
You have to have research. We do have to have research questions, that I know, so somebody would like to.
I withdraw my question.
That's the one thing they require.
Chairman does not have that privilege.
That's the one thing they do require for criterion D is research questions.
Well, I would be willing to help you formulate those
Okay.
in the future. If that issue comes up again, I'll be certain to bring it up.
All right.
Other questions about the fire tower? Motion to approve. Wayne? Second? JR. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained?
Great, thank you.
All right, next up is Jennifer Walkowski, correct? And Chandler Street Industrial Buildings in Buffalo, St. Vincent de Paul, and Western.
Well, thank you. That's an intro. All right, take you to Buffalo now. So the Chandler Street industrial buildings are significant under criteria A and C in the areas of industry and architecture as a locally significant collection of 3 factory buildings that were erected between 1902 and 1903 in the Grant Amherst neighborhood of Buffalo. The historic district consists of the Jewett Refrigerator Company factory, the Double Truss Cornice Brake Company, and the Keystone Manufacturing Company factory. The period of significance for the Chandler Street industrial buildings dates from 1902 to 1929 and covers the physical development of the district, starting with the construction of the factories and ending when the Jewett Refrigerator and Double Truss Cornice Brake Companies sold their factories in 1929. The Keystone Manufacturing Company remained on Chandler Street into the 1980s. The period of significance, however, encompasses the period during which the associated companies were at their most prominent in relationship to the Beltline Railroad. So the 3 factories are intact examples of the rapid industrialization that occurred in the Grant Amherst neighborhood after the completion of the New York Central Railroad Beltline, a 19-mile loop of railroad tracks that encircled Buffalo and made it possible to decentralize industry and erect factories in fringe communities like Grant Amherst starting in the late 19th century. Y'all probably tired about reading. We have a lot of factories on the Beltline Railroad, and you may remember that not too long ago down the street we nominated the Lindy Air Products Factory, which is another tax credit, also on Chandler Street, but further to the east. So several distinct industrial nodes developed in the neighborhood, among them Chandler Street, which largely developed between the first 3 decades of the 20th century and contained a mix of large multi-acre manufacturing plants and smaller workshops and industrial lofts. This diversity is evident in Chandler Street industrial buildings and is important to understanding the diversity of industrial activity that took place around the Beltline. So the products manufactured in the Chandler Street industrial building district also reflect the diversity of production around the Beltline and the production freedom provided by the railroad. The Jewett Refrigerator Company produced high-end refrigerators, still a luxury in the early 20th century. The Double Truss Cornice Brake Company produced a specialized piece of construction equipment that actually made metal cornices. And the Keystone Manufacturing Company produced a wide range of hand tools. Each company shipped products to major markets outside of Buffalo and used the Beltline to facilitate the movement of raw materials and finished goods. So the factories themselves are good representative examples of 2 important industrial building types that were popular in the early 20th century. The Jewett Refrigerator Company factory and the Double Truss Cornice Brake Company are both representative examples of industrial lofts, multi-story buildings designed with open floor plates to facilitate the installation of machinery and the movement of workers throughout the workplace. Keystone Manufacturing Company, meanwhile, centers around a machine shop, a type of one-story building designed to house heavy machinery. The weight and vibration of heavy machines inform the design and construction of machine shops, which frequently use concrete and steel to provide structural stability. The Keystone Manufacturing Company factory also contained an administration building which separated office work from the smoke and dust of the manufacturing space. The factories in general have several architectural similarities, including load-bearing masonry walls, fireproof building materials and construction methods, and regularly spaced windows to maximize sunlight. I just want to note that all three of these industrial buildings have applied for the Historic Preservation Tax Credit programs, and they all three have approved Part 1s. So this is the Chandler Street Industrial Buildings. Are there any questions on this?
I was fascinated to hear that the wooden beams in the interior stood up to fire better than iron beams, which buckle.
Well, I'm no engineer.
There's also, the other comment I would make is lack of interior photos.
Well, this is a historic district. I mean, we can certainly include some of those, but really it's about the relationship of these kind of smaller, lower tier, industrial manufacturing spaces built within just a few decades of just a few years of each other, and sort of the juxtaposition of them lined up on the street. The field across the street here in this photo was a very large production facility right on the Beltline Railroad, sort of the first tier of manufacturer, and then these little guys over that didn't have direct access to the railroad but still benefited from it, are sort of reflective of this kind of smaller level of factory spaces that were once very prominent in this area.
Other questions? Yeah, the bell. Other questions, comments? Do I hear a motion to accept? Erica?
Yep.
Seconded by Wayne. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Next up is the Bewley Building.
So now we're going to Lockport. The Bewley Building, located on Market Street in Lockport in Niagara County, is a locally significant example of an early 20th century Italian Renaissance commercial building. It has served as a centerpiece and primary anchor for Lockport's commercial core for nearly a century. Built between 1928 and 29 to the design of the Buffalo-based firm Carl G. Schmill & Sons, the building is an expansive 5-story brick and precast stone building that has continuously housed a mix of retail and commercial operations, as well as various offices on the upper floors. The Bewley Building was built on the footprint of not one, but 2 different Hodge opera houses, both lost to fires in 1881 and again in 1928. Using portions of the damaged building's rubble stone wall in its construction, the Bewley Building was heralded as a state-of-the-art modern commercial and office building in Lockport. The Bewley Building is locally significant under Criterion A in the area of commerce for its associations with commercial development in Lockport. The Bewley Building has served as an anchor for downtown commercial development in Lockport for nearly a century, reflecting the change of the early 20th century from small-scale, locally owned stores to the arrival of national retail chains such as Sears, Roebuck & Company, and to the eventual decline of retail and national chains in downtown. And if you actually look in this picture, you can see it says Sears right in here, so they were located in this kind of area of the building historically. Here in these photos, you can see the stone wall. It's a big building. It's difficult to kind of get a shot of. This is actually like way across like the Erie Canal. But you can see the stonework of the earlier Hodge Opera House kind of incorporated into that rear wall. So additionally, the Italian Renaissance Revival style 2-part commercial block is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for illustrating the changing commercial design trends and fireproof building construction technologies of the early 20th century. Notable exterior features include 2-part vertical block design with precast stone and red brick storefronts and centered recessed entrances and a crowning terracotta cornice. Sorry, some tongue twisters here. Hard to see here. This is the plaque that was installed with the name of the building. This is under a canopy at the front, so it's kind of a weird view. So the interior was designed originally for use of simple, flexible retail and office suites with a moderate level of interior finishes. The period of significance for the building runs from 1928 to 1966. This era encompasses the original design by and the construction of the building by the Bewley family, as well as the mid-century renovation meant to give the building a modern facelift. This renovation was meant to attract new customers at a time when downtown retailing was declining and shoppers increasingly turned to suburban shopping centers. The period of significance ends in 1966 when the anchor retail tenant of the Bewley building, Sears Roebuck and Company, vacated the building in favor of a freestanding box development store set in a parking lot outside of the town. So while the building continues to be owned by the Bewley family and operates with the same mix of commercial and office tenants, the period of significance correlates with the building's era of greatest prosperity before the mid-century shift from city core to suburban retail developments that were fueled by the automobile age. So this is the Bewley building. Are there any questions on this?
Yes, Jennifer. One of the earlier businesses at this site was named the Merchant's Gargling Oil. A most frightening name. I wonder if it could be a misprint for gurgling oil. Oh, that's pretty frightening too. Do we know what that is?
Well, it's in a nutshell, it's one of those sort of snake oil liniments. You know, but it was gargling oil. Yes. It actually. I mean, without getting too much into the story of the company, which I do know actually a little bit about, ironically, but they started off as a medicine for horses, but it was a liniment that you could apply to your sore horse, but it was so popular that people started gargling with it themselves as a sort of cure-all. So their logos was actually a horse, and then they got a little horse.
Too much fun committee.
Thank you. That's a very full list.
It's only my second meeting. I shouldn't speak up.
Do I hear a motion?
Not by me.
Oh, Erica moves. I saw her hand. Wait, seconds, all in favor.
Free bottle.
Say that again.
Did anyone vote nay?
Stronger water for these meetings.
Moving right along.
North Park Branch Library.
So the North Park Branch Library is locally significant under Criterion A in the area of education for its role in providing reading and educational materials, as well as community space to residents in the North Park neighborhood of Buffalo, New York. The library is also locally significant under Criterion C in architecture as a good example of a small-scale Tudor Revival branch library. The one-story library is located on the corner of Hurdle Avenue and Delaware Avenue, two of North Park's busiest streets. The period of significance for the library extends from 1928 to 1952, beginning with the construction and concluding with the renovation campaign of 1952 that added a secondary exit to the library. Otherwise, it kind of made minimal changes. This period of significance also marks the era during which the library largely served a local clientele who generally walked to their neighborhood library. While the library functioned until 2008, the period of significance reflects the library's greatest period of activity in the growing North Park neighborhood, as well as the most significant architectural changes to the property. Built in 1928, the library was the 12th branch library opened by the Buffalo Public Library and the second in North Buffalo. Howard L. Beck, Buffalo city architect, designed the library, while Roder Kinkle completed the landscaping plan. Beck modeled his design for the library on the Decker Branch Public Library in Denver, Colorado, a widely imitated Carnegie Library established in 1913. The Buffalo Public Library began planning the North Park Branch Library in 1925 in response to a growing demand for library services from North Park residents. At that time, the North Park neighborhood was a rapidly growing residential area of primarily middle-class households. These residents sought a more suburban lifestyle away from Buffalo's older and more densely settled developed downtown neighborhoods and advocated for conveniently located library services for their neighborhood, which was roughly 2 miles away from the nearest branch library. After the Buffalo Public Library opened the North Park Branch Library, it became a major community asset, and within a year, patrons had borrowed over 4,000 books from the library, and a number of local clubs use the building's basement auditorium as a meeting place. The library attracted thousands of local patrons annually who would request books from the downtown Central Library, giving North Park residents access to the Buffalo Public Library's entire collection. The North Park Branch Library is the only Tudor Revival library book designed in Buffalo. You can really see the similarities here. Other than the change in the windows, it's pretty much the same building almost. So here, this is a view, a little hard to make out. It's a little larger in the draft, but the way the building is really set back at the far corner of the property really kind of sets it away from that busy intersection and kind of gives it a more peaceful suburban retreat. It's still a very busy intersection, but it still has sort of a bucolic, rural kind of sense to that tiny little piece of land. So the building features two wings that extend at an obtuse angle with trees and a curved walk leading to the front entrance, giving the library the feeling of a low English country cottage. Beck's design, together with Kinkle's landscaping, gives the library a rural feeling despite its location at the intersection of two major streets. This feeling of rural quaintness is not seen in Beck's other branch libraries, which were primarily executed in the more formal colonial revival or Renaissance revival style, two common architectural forms for libraries of the early 20th century. Here are some interior views of the building. Basically, you walk in the door and you're fronted with the two wings. So you can see here the reading room, which is over in this area here. This fireplace is intact. The book here, a little hard to see with all the doodads stuck on the wall, but the book here is actually molded into the plaster, so that's a historic feature. Very simple, very minimal design. Here's the other wing, which housed stacks and books, tables. But the cove molding here is intact, the original building. It's possible that there may be the historic flooring material under here. It's a little hard to tell. This is a view of the basement. It's a little hard to see in the dark here. We didn't have too much light. But this is actually like a little raised stage area where they'd have those community meetings, kind of a flexible auditorium type of space. So this is actually a nice story because after public outcry halted its planned demolition, the building is slated to become a new Italian-American community center. So this is considered a nice preservation save in the city of Buffalo.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I grew up in this neighborhood. I lived on North Park Street for years in an apartment off Myrtle. I currently live in a Tudor Revival house built the same year as the structure and in walking distance from it.
So you and Mike Schifferly.
Yeah. He's a North Buffalo kid too.
Yeah, it is. So
It's
this
a great
is
building.
the North Park Library. Are there any questions on this?
Questions? Tom moves. I'll second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. That was great.
Now we go out to a different end of a different lake, to Watertown. So the Abingdon and New Abingdon apartments, located at the corner of Holcomb and Mullen Streets in Watertown, are locally significant under Criterion A in the area of social history and under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good representative example of early 20th century apartment housing that catered to the growing middle and upper class that was settling in Watertown during the era. Watertown's industrial boom at the end of the 20th century created a rising middle class whose population spike necessitated a new building type, the apartment house, which is trending throughout New York and the United States. So the Abingdon and New Abingdon apartments, as the name suggests, was built in two phases. The first phase, built at the north end of the property, this kind of part here, was built in 1908 for Watertown lawyer and real estate developer Abner B. Brown. Not long after, in 1910, construction began on an expansion of the building, oriented facing south, known as New Abingdon. Both portions were designed by local architect Addison Farwell Lansing. The two components, set perpendicular to each other, only connect in the basement, providing more private entrances to the occupants. So you can even see this is a current floor plan, and that there's no interaction on the upper floors, so they're a little bit more private. Buildings like the Abingdon and New Abingdon apartments were considered housekeeping apartments that offered janitorial services and amenities that could not be attained in a single-family home. Positioned in a wealthy neighborhood away from the busy public square and industrial centers, the Abingdon and New Abingdon apartments was located in a desirable residential location for this growing population. The building's architectural design showcased the departure from early multifamily living spaces such as tenements. Lansing's interior layouts incorporated important elements of privacy for his housing type, like the separation of public spaces at the front of the apartment and private spaces like bedrooms at the rear. Its classical revival elements were intended to appeal to upper middle class residents, project social uplifting to aspiring middle and upper middle class tenants, and blend into the surrounding residential community. So this is Abington and New Abington Apartments. Are there any questions on this?
So this is a 2017 tax credit project?
I believe so.
So it's got a certain amount of time to get on the register, is that the idea?
Yeah, I think they have an approved part 3. So.
This is one of Emily's projects that Jennifer
right.
was kind enough to do. More than she bargained for. But
Other questions or comments about Abington? Motion?
To address your new question, the rules require that it be listed on the National Register within 30 months after they claim the tax credit.
30 months,
30 months. 2.5 years.
Yeah, great, thank you. Motion to approve? Jay? Win seconds, all in favor?
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
yeah.
Next up, Kathy Frank will talk about the Hamilton District Number 1 school, Collins, Delaware County.
Questions? No. This is the Hamden District Number 1 school, which is southwest of the village of Hamden, on the south side of the west branch of the Delaware River, which bisects the town of Hamden. Or in other words, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's actually not all that far from the fire tower, if I actually look on the map. District 1 was one of the first school districts established in the town of Hamden in 1828, and the first school was built across the road from this in that same year. This building replaced it in 1859 and served District 1 until 1954. The small rectangular building is typical of the majority of schools built in this region during the mid-19th century in form and size. It's 3 bays wide and 3 bays deep with a gable roof and embodies local building traditions featuring a heavy timber frame, dry-laid stone foundation, and wood clapboard siding. This one is a little longer and a little bit more embellished than some of the other local examples. It is distinguished by pilasters on all 4 corners and a full pediment with raking cornice. Now the story here is that is how this building was purchased by the town of Hamden in 2015 and substantially restored. The 2 double-hung facade windows with 6/6 sash survived and were used as models to replicate windows for the side and rear elevations. Original siding was repaired or replicated where necessary. The original wood-shaped shingle roof had survived, but it was badly damaged, so it was replicated in kind. On the interior, the building is divided into a hall, which is flanked by 2 small spaces that were used for bathrooms with later pit toilets, and a single large classroom heated by a stove. All the surfaces featured tongue-and-groove wood siding that was repaired or replaced as necessary, and the building still does not have running water. The adjacent wood shed is 19th century. We're not sure whether it's original or a later replacement. It does have a heavy timber sill, and but we're just not sure. It is definitely the wood shed for this school. After the town bought the building, the original plan was to move it to the Hamden Village Green a few miles away so that more people could learn about its history. But our very own Tony Opalka, Tony, are you still here, convinced them that that was not the most appropriate way to preserve and interpret the history of rural education. So Tony gets major kudos here, as does Town Supervisor Wayne Marshfield, who was the driving force behind the restoration project, which was accomplished by the Delaware County Planning Department and I believe funds from DASME. So I want to commend everyone for an exemplary project here. Questions about Hamden, is it District Number 1? School District Number 1?
Kath, so is the building not being used as a museum? Is that how I'm interpreting the space? Or how does the town use it?
It's going to be a museum. Yeah. And actually, I meant to bring the map. I found a 1925 map, and within I don't know, a 5-mile radius of this particular schoolhouse, there had to be 10 other schools. It's amazing how many little one-room schools there were in the 20s. And it's near Walton, and then they were all consolidated in the larger village of Walton. And to bring that map to show you, it was very interesting. This Hollow School, that Hollow School. Well, we actually, Dunk Hollow School put on a few years ago, just a few miles from this. This is a wonderful project.
I'd love to see more properties listed on the register that could be characterized as being in the middle of nowhere. I think it's wonderful.
That's where it is, in the middle of nowhere.
We have a motion to approve by Tom. Is there a second? Kristen? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Carries. Unanimous.
And then our very last property, and a favorite of mine, I said it was eligible about 15 years ago. This is the Norwich Pharmaceutical Company warehouse. It's located in the center of the city of Norwich. It's south and east of existing historic districts in the central business district, and it's just west of the railroad line, and there was a spur from the railroad line to the warehouse. It's also about 3 blocks south of the main factory complex for the Norwich Pharmaceutical Company. However, most of the factory buildings have been either demolished or altered. Likewise, it's also 3 blocks from the Eaton family residence, which was listed on the register in 2009. And several generations of the Eaton family were major investors and managers of Norwich Pharmaceutical from the 1890s through the 1950s. It was a very important local family. The warehouse was built in 1916, and it's significant under criteria A and C for its association with the Norwich Pharmaceutical Company, the city's most important industry, and is a highly intact example of a 20th century reinforced concrete industrial warehouse. Norwich Pharmaceutical was established in the 1880s, and it became famous in 1893 when it introduced unguentine, the first antiseptic surgical dressing, and its best-known product. I'm hoping at least one of you has heard of unguentine. How about you?
Yes.
None of my colleagues has heard of it.
Continuously.
Originally used for horses.
In 1903, Norwich Pharmaceutical acquired another important product that I know you've heard of, Pepto-Bismol. And in 1907, it began to produce Norwich aspirin, one of the earlier pain relievers of this type. By the 1910s, Norwich Pharmaceutical was a leader in the pharmaceutical industry, and it was then under the management of the Eaton family, producing over 4,000 products. Then in 1919, the company decided to cut its product line to just 59, including the 3 products I just mentioned, and to market them aggressively. It remained the city's major employer into the 1980s, and it was purchased in 1983 by Procter & Gamble. After that, consolidations began, and the last employees left the factory, then located in North Norwich, in 2007. The warehouse was built in 1916 when the company was at its most diversified. And I believe that this was the company's only purpose-built warehouse. The warehouse was designed by Charles Keene, I believe that's how you pronounce it. He was an important Utica industrial architect and engineer who designed a number of large industrial buildings, including barge canal terminals at Albany, Troy, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and Gowanus, none of which survive. The building is a good example of poured-in-place reinforced concrete construction featuring concrete piers, hollow tile walls laid 2 courses deep, concrete floors and ceilings, and mushroom columns. This building is typical of a type used for cold storage warehouses and other storage facilities where daylight was not important and buildings were equipped with electric lighting. Hollow tile walls provided for greater heat and moisture protection than brick and better insulation because they had interior airspace. Although they were sometimes covered with brick or stucco, in many cases, such as this one, they were left exposed. The only alteration to this building is the replacement of the original windows in the same openings. In 1932, a stair, an elevator tower, and a wing were added. The stairs are poured concrete with steel railings. The wing is typical of its era, featuring a steel frame, concrete block walls, brick facing, and also replacement windows in the original openings. This photo is looking from the new wing into the old, and they're separated by sliding fire doors on each floor. The Norwich Pharmaceutical Company warehouse was used for only one purpose, and it is almost pristinely intact. We have a nice letter of support from the mayor of Norwich, which is very encouraging to me because I don't believe we've had a nomination in the city since we listed the Eaton residence in 2009. And the current mayor's office didn't seem to be aware of anything like the homeowner's tax credit or any other programs that we administer, although we have had one or two tax credit, commercial tax credits projects in Norwich. So I hope to convey this into some more outreach. But this is a potential tax credit project. The owners are interested in using the tax credits. So that is the Norwich Pharmaceutical Company warehouse. Any questions?
Comments about Norwich? Motion to accept. Wint. Paul Stewart is the second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstained?
It's an encouraging industrial story, really. Discouraging last chapter.
Yeah.
What was that? And I'm so glad somebody is sort of unmoved because I sprayed on sunburn stuff.
Motion to adjourn. J.D. Lorenzo moves to adjourn.
Wait.
Oh, you have a second.
I have to. Oh, you have. Oh, go ahead.
Second?
Oh, I didn't know you were taking over.
Yes. Kristen seconds. All in favor of adjourning? Aye. Seems unanimous.